Good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome into our special edition of Hoopsville on this Matchup Monday, bracket day here in Division III basketball. I am your host, Dave McHugh, and welcome to the show. We'll start it this way. What does it mean to make it to the NCAA tournament for the first time in program history? Well, that's easy. Let's ask the UMass Dartmouth Corsairs for the first time in program history. Well, that's easy. Let's ask the UMass Dartmouth Corsairs for the first time in program history. Well, that's easy. Let's ask the UMass Dartmouth Corsairs for the first time in program history. Well, that's easy. Let's ask the UMass Dartmouth Corsairs. It just doesn't get any better than that. That's the reaction of a team who earned their way in with that large bid for their first ever tournament. Congratulations to the Corsairs. Congratulations to all the teams who made it into the tournament. Well deserved, to say the least. I loved in that one where they reacted. They couldn't believe they heard it. You see their coach emotional. Then there's a little bit of a subdue. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, no, we really didn't. And react again. It is outstanding. Congratulations to the UMass Corsairs. I can't say that there aren't going to be disappointments out there. Clearly there are. But you got to be happy for the teams who make it in, especially in one of those cases. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If we're going to try and answer your questions, there's going to be a lot of questions out there. We know that to be true, so certainly fire your way. We will do our best. You can email us, hoopsville@d3hoops.com. You can join us on Facebook at facebook.com/Hoopsville, where we're live streaming the event. You can also join us via tweet us at D3Hoopsville or #Hoopsville. It's the way you can join us, and we hope you will take advantage of that when you can. So, listen, there's going to be some questions. As far as how did we do, I believe we missed 2 on both brackets, which, considering what we were facing, I think was pretty darn good. I feared we were going to miss a lot more on the men's side. The one that we debated the most on the men's side ended up getting in. But I think it's a little controversial because I don't know if the committee is truly aware of what's going on when it comes to I'm sorry, I get distracted with the links. Guys, I'm aware. I'll fix it. I'm not sure if the committee stuck to their guns in the same way. So they bring in Oshkosh, really good SOS, certainly some quality wins. There were some reasons to bring them in. We debated it last night, and the only reason we cut it out was below 667. Okay, so they brought him in. So be it, we got a new trend. However, bringing in St. Thomas concerns me a little bit because I think there are other teams with similar criteria, if not better criteria than St. Thomas, who had a decent SOS at 530, but so did some others. So why did St. Thomas get in, maybe not on the strength of their SOS, with a lower win-loss percentage than some other teams? Yet Oshkosh got in, not on the strength of the win-loss, obviously, but on the strength of their SOS. I think it contradicts each other. I could be wrong. We'll talk to Kevin Vande Streek later in the show about that and figure out why that may have happened. I'm sure he'll have an interesting point of view on it, and we'll certainly look forward to hearing from him with what he says about it. We'll also hear from the Women's Committee chair coming up as well. She will join us to talk about the brackets, as it were. I think the women did a pretty decent job. I can hem and haw on a couple things, that is for sure. But I'm looking forward to maybe seeing something, hearing from her on some of the decisions. They ended up moving Calvin ahead of Carnegie Mellon in the end. I think that's intriguing, to say the least. That now the debate is, there's Bethel fans who want them to get in. I'm going to have to relook at Bethel's numbers, but, George Fox got in. That was the other one we got wrong, which meant the committee decided to reward him despite the lack of 3 wins. I don't have a major problem with that. It certainly was on the verge. If we played that game, I think George Fox would have been the pick. The question becomes, did Bethel then get to the table? Well, it also depends on when George Fox got picked. Calvin gets in with a below 500 SOS, but it's below 500 by the scantest of margins. So I think their win over Hope certainly helped them. So I don't think that any of those arguments give Bethel's the nod, if that makes any sense. But again, we're going to talk to Bobbi Morgan coming up on the show as well. We'll talk to Kevin Vande Streek. Overall, I think on the men's side, the bracket is rather fascinating. A couple things that jumped out at me. Looks like they're paying for an extra flight to make sure Hardin-Simmons could stay home, instead of trying to find a geographic one and save a flight. The way Whitman's bracket's set up, they're either going to be able to be at home because everyone's going to be too far away from each other, or if Rochester and Marietta stay close to each other, one of those two will host, meaning Whitman will travel. But nothing against the other teams. I think this is the first time the Northwest Conference has gotten a truly winnable road to Salem, if that makes any sense. It is yet to be proven. Whitman's going to have to get through the first weekend. They're going to have to face off against Whitworth again. But I think the Northwest Conference in as a whole may have one of their first truly winnable traditional brackets that we have. I think the last one you could have made that argument, at least get to Salem, was the one we had the Atlanta year when everything was thrown out pretty much. But that's what stood out with me in the bracketing. Very diverse. I thought they spread the wealth as much as they could. We have a couple times, for example, there was in the lower left-hand corner, we got a double New York State game and a double was it Atlantic region, or I might have the regions wrong. I'll call it up in a minute. I quickly had a chance to talk to Coach Vande Streek earlier today, and basically they wanted, and it was Northeast, that was because it was Tufts. They wanted to respect Tufts as being the top seed there, though not being able to host because the women were hosting, and so they didn't want to give them St. Lawrence. They felt Salem State was a more respectable opponent considering Tufts' position in the regional rankings. I can understand that. Occasionally that's going to make you end up having an odd fit there. We can probably hem and haw and figure out a better way to do that. But if that's the worst complaint that we have in terms of bracketing, I think we're fine. So, again, on the men's and women's side, we missed two. If we had moved Calvin ahead of Carnegie Mellon on the women's side and we had thought about that and we did it, would it have been different for us? Maybe. I think we still left George Fox out, so we probably still would have missed one. We tend to miss one or two on the women's side. We've only had one perfect pick on the men's side. That was 2 years ago. We missed two on this side, and that came down to the Oshkosh. And honestly, Oshkosh, missing that could have derailed us for 4 picks. So the fact that we only missed two, I think, is pretty good. It comes down to, very close on all these decisions. I think the Oshkosh one's the most fascinating, and we'll certainly talk to Coach about that. If you've got any questions, like I said, email us, tweet us, or whatever. We will certainly try and take your questions as best we can. Coming up in a bit, Gordon Mann will join us, maybe some others, to discuss the brackets and what we saw today. We're probably going to be on air until about 6 p.m. Eastern time, which is a little over 2 hours. Maybe a little longer because the men's committee chair may not come on until about 5:45, so maybe about 6:30. Don't want to go too much later, to be blunt, because I'm a little worn out. Gordon's worn out. The rest of us are worn out. And we've got a big weekend coming up next weekend as well. So in this studio. So we want to make sure that we don't lose our mind. If you got questions, send them our way. We'd love to hear from you and hope that we can answer your questions. And I'm trying to think if there's one thing that jumps out at me. I think the biggest is that it looks, at least especially on the men's side, that they really took care in the brackets. On the women's side, I think we saw signs. There's still some matchups I don't love. I think the challenge on the women's side is because there's such a gap between the top and the really good teams and everybody else that you end up getting into some games that you don't love, but you don't have a choice. And I think you end up with some sacrificial lambs, and I hate to say that. And I think it ends up with some ugly bracketing, and it's in the early weekend parts. But if you look at the overall structure here on the women's side, Amherst is clearly their number one. They're giving them a little bit of a nice guide, as it were, to try and get to Calvin. Every other team is going to hit some road bumps. Thomas More in the second game of the weekend. It's either going to be Hope or Whitewater. Wash U is not necessarily protected where they are. They're going to have a whole list of teams that they're going to have to go through. In the upper right, Tufts is going to have some challenges. At least we separated Amherst and Tufts. I did appreciate that. On the men's side, same deal. I don't think anybody's got an easy road, and I don't think we're going to be able to say anybody had an easy road to Salem. The regions are well mixed. The Northeast is going to have to deal with the Mid-Atlantic and the Atlantic, and maybe to some degree the Great Lakes. There are geographic isolations. We've got no choice. But for the most part, I thought the committees did as much of a good job of balancing as they could. Now, that's having looked at a bracket this morning, rushingly looked through it to get ready for the bracket shows, getting another bracket while the other bracket show's on the air is being recorded, doing the on-air stuff, answering questions, preparing for the next. Anyway, I haven't had a chance to dive as far into it as I'd like. But for the most part, I think it's a pretty solid bracket and good work. We're going to nitpick. We always can. And it almost makes me think of shows like Top Chef. When it gets down to the end, when you got a bunch of great chefs in there, you got to eliminate somebody. Well, we can nitpick if we want to. Let's be honest. We really, really could. And I think we will to some degree along those lines. Again, questions, email us, etc. Just tuned in, so maybe just been discussed this. This is from Todd on Twitter. I know travel costs need to be kept down, but 3 Northwest schools in one pod seems like a shame. Well, welcome to Division III basketball, to be blunt. Only once have they broken that up. It was back in 2013, I believe it was, when they shipped Whitman out. That was a year they kind of loosened up the purse strings a little bit, and in 2014, there was a lot of regret for that. We were into a major budget hole. And so the budget strings have been loosened slightly, but they're pretty tight. You can't justify it. It's interesting that we got 3 teams. It has happened before. It's not uncommon. It's going to happen again. Unless we can find some benefactor who's willing to pay for 6, 8, 10 flights. Because remember, to fly Whitman out of there, let's say it's Whitman, maybe it's George Fox. To fly one of them out of there, you have to fly somebody else in. So that's not a 1-flight decision. That's a 2-flight decision. And so, but here's the thing. It's not like the Northwest is the only one that we see this effect. If you go to Texas, Trinity, Texas has been removed from being able to host, even though they should. It's going to Texas, Dallas, because Texas, Dallas, and Hendricks are within a driving distance from each other. So Trinity's also getting an unfair deal here. And you could argue that Trinity and Texas, Dallas really shouldn't be facing off in the second round of the tournament. But they will. So, yes, the Northwest is unfortunate. But we saw the writing on the wall. If George Fox, we were saying last night, if we selected George Fox and they got in, that was a 3-team pod, plain and simple. It is unfortunate that Whitman is going to play George Fox, but just because Whitman beat Puget Sound did not trump that Puget Sound was the better team in the criteria. It was 1 win out of 3 games. So the criteria still favors Puget Sound. Puget Sound rightfully should be the host of that game, of that weekend. And they will get UC Santa Cruz, not surprisingly. And we had to ship 2 teams out of California. We knew that was going to happen. So, yes, it's unfortunate, but this is Division III, and to some degree, it is exactly what we see in Division III. Whitman will play George Fox for the 3rd time in 2.5 or some odd weeks. Every time they've played, the team that lost the previous time won that time. So in that case, should we write George Fox in? I don't know. Whitman has made a nice run to the conference championship, so I expect to see them certainly give George Fox a good game. But it is just the nature of Division III, and there's just nothing we can do about that. Let's see here. Any other questions that are coming in? We're looking around to see if we're missing anything. Oh, I slid over one on my tweet deck, so there we go. If you got it, you can also email us, hoopsville@d3hoops.com. Also on our Twitter page, I know gets somewhat popular. Hold on a second. I got to close a couple windows here so I can find what I'm looking for. I know Twitter page gets some questions in there. How about the Hope men? You missed Hope. How did I miss Hope? Aviation says, I asked yesterday about Laterno men's team. Why do you think they didn't get into the bracket? Because their SOS was barely above 500, and by barely above 500, it was really 500. 504, 505. It just wasn't a strong enough SOS to get into the conversation. I think one thing that the committee has definitely said on the men's side is that kind of SOS is dangerous. Women have been willing to go below that SOS. I think the difference when you look at it is the men's SOS has that weighted measure of home and away involved, and so they understand that an above 500 SOS, what it truly means, whereas I think on the women's side, the below 500 SOS, since it's not being weighted, is more in play, if that makes any sense. And by below 500 SOS, Calvin got in with a 490 something. I mean, they were basically as close to 500 below it as Letourneau was above it. But on the men's side of things, there's just no way Letourneau was going to get in. If Letourneau got in on that SOS, when Oshkosh got in on an SOS that was a full point higher, I'd be pretty surprised. If they didn't let out, what I'm basically saying is if they brought Oshkosh in basically on an SOS that was 600 or well above 600, there's no way Letourneau with a 505 is getting in. If they had left Oshkosh off with that, with a really good win-loss, it still doesn't help Letourneau's argument. The SOS is massively off. Taking Mount St. Joseph is 20-5 with an SOS of 525, 530. They got left home. So if they're getting left home, and by the way, Letourneau was behind them in criteria already, you would have needed a lot of teams to go before Letourneau would have had a shot. So Letourneau didn't have a shot. That's pretty much where that came down to. What are your thoughts on Newman? How far do you think they can go? I don't know. I'm glad to see that they're home. I think that is a good development for them. The funny thing is, I just kind of realized I didn't have my darn brackets up in front of me, so I apologize. We'll fix that here in short order. I like their bracket. There's nothing about it that screams at me any issues. Let's see. They're hosting Nichols. Nichols' first time into the tournament. I think that's fine. Salisbury, I think that's a good second-round game potentially for Newman, and Endicott's on the other side. Now, I know some people in this pod are going to scream bloody murder about two Triple-C teams sitting there. Committee's aware that they're both from the same conference. That was a conscious decision. I think Eastern Connecticut was kind of part of that conversation as well as to where they put everybody. We'll talk to the committee here, but I think it came down to, listen, just because you're from the same conference doesn't mean we necessarily have to protect you. I mean, Newman and Cabrini are potentially the next round anyway. So, you know, I don't have a major problem. I understand you could make some changes here, but if we moved Eastern Connecticut and Endicott, let's just make that argument. Is that necessarily any more fair? I think the Eastern Connecticut MIT matchup is a little bit is better, and Salisbury Endicott is better than Salisbury Eastern Con and Endicott MIT. So, and then Nichols, first time in, wouldn't have made it in otherwise, you know, being a good spot there for Newman. Newman has the potential coming out of this weekend, but so does Salisbury. So does Endicott. So does Nichols. I think this is a very good middle-of-the-road pod. All four of those teams have something to prove. And Newman's not necessarily guaranteed to come out of that on top. Salisbury versus Newman will be an outstanding game if it happens. Endicott and Nichols are going to have a lot to say about that. And then after that, Newman's in the Middlebury pod. They will go to Vermont if they were to get out of it. And most likely, I mean, Cabrini could maybe knock off Middlebury. Lyco could maybe do it, but the way Middlebury's playing, I don't see it happening. At least in gut, initial reaction. So let's just say it's Middlebury and Newman's got that. Now that is going to be a test for Newman. If Newman comes out of the Middlebury game, that's impressive. That's going to be Cabrini-esque back in the heyday impressive for Newman if they're able to pull that off. I'd be very impressed. Let's see here. If you got any of the questions, let us know. There will be chowder. That's what I think. Hold on. What's going on? I'm missing something here from Wags. What do you think of the NJAC or NJCU Skidmore Babson Hudson pod? Oh, Wags says there'll be chowder. Listen, I will tell you now, Ira, if you're heading up there, a place you want to go, and I'll give a free shout out. And if they're kind enough to reciprocate by sending me some of their clam chowder, I'd appreciate it. But if you're heading to Boston, go to Legal Seafood and get the clam chowder. I cannot emphasize that enough. It is my It is one of the my top items of favorite foods in legal seafood clam chowder. Get it? It's awesome. As far as the bracket goes, I kind of like this little group. First off, maybe Babson doesn't have as challenging a bracket if they had won the New Mac title. Maybe they replace Middlebury in the upper right. But I think it's a good one here. Husson's at least relatively close at home for their Bangor, Maine fans. I think that works for them. Would I have liked to see him go further? Sure, but pick your poison. It's either Babson or Middlebury, or maybe a little further south to Ramapo, if they can get to Ramapo. It wasn't going to be pretty for Husson. Skidmore, New Jersey City, I like it. That's one of my circle games on Friday. Skidmore is a very good team in the tournament. They've got very good players. Vitkus is going to be outstanding, playing a very solid defensive team, which Skidmore is as well in New Jersey City. And then the winner is potentially taking on Babson. No disrespect to Husson at all. I like that. And what it does, too, is it does one big thing for either Skidmore or New Jersey City. Are you that good? Let's prove it. First, you're going to have to get by each other, and then you're going to have to get past Babson. And if you can do that, people are going to turn their heads. That is a good test for both those teams. Yeah, I could see someone arguing, come on, that's not necessarily fair. Babson was 1 or 2 in the region, and those other 2 were 5 or 6ers, right? Or 3 or 4s. I'm fine with this matchup. I like it. I think it's a good one. And by the way, for Babson fans and Husson fans, you get a great little aperitif, as it were, to start things off on Friday night. I like that matchup. I like it a lot. Any other questions? I'll try and answer them as best I can. They're having some fun on Twitter. What are your opinion on Gustavus women? They got a crappy draw. In your opinion, but can they make a run? They didn't get a crappy draw. Well, listen, I know you're making that argument, but I'm going to tell you, I don't see where else they were going to go. It's not like Gustavus's numbers were earth-shattering. Okay, they lost twice. Outstanding. They lost twice to St. Thomas. So be it. But it's not like the rest of their numbers were blow-away type numbers. That's, if you're going to prove something, that's not a bad place to prove it. They weren't going to host. First off, they weren't one of the top 2 in the West region. That's the first argument. They hadn't beat St. Thomas. They weren't going to get past Puget Sound. Furthermore, if they had gotten past Puget Sound in the regional rankings, and I haven't seen them yet, what those final regional rankings were, Puget Sound's in the Northwest, so that host is gone. Furthermore, it's not like they're located in a place you can get a lot of teams to them. Who are you going to drive to Gustavus Adolphus, by the way, that you're not driving to St. Thomas? So Gustavus Adolphus' chance at hosting, none. They played DePaul. That's a good 2-3 game right there in those mini pods. Remember, not 2-3 in the national scope of things. I'm talking smaller pods. I like that. And at Wash U, go prove yourself. I like that too. I think it's at Wash U. Ooh, I might be wrong on that one. So I don't have a major issue with that for Gustavus. Yeah, it's a tough draw, but I don't think Gustavus did necessarily anything to just say, oh, we should get an easy draw. I don't. And it's no disrespect to Gustavus. It's just that here's my argument. If they had beaten St. Thomas once, I think the argument is there. But here's the other problem. We have Geographics involved. They're coming from a part in the country. They're going to run into a juggernaut. It was either going to be Oshkosh or it was going to be Wash U or whatever. But, I mean, I don't even think they can get to Oshkosh within 500 miles. I could be wrong. We'll check it out right now. Actually, I mean, maybe they can. I misspelled it. There we go. They could have gotten to Oshkosh, but then that might, or maybe but that then trumps, or maybe that is where they're going. Sorry, I don't literally, you know what? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to find I'm going to find my bracket another way. So I've lost it online. I'm trying to look it up now. So here we go. I've got my bracket another way. So I'm looking for Gustavus, right? Well, maybe not. It doesn't like me. There we are. All right, so DePaul, yeah, they're at Oshkosh. I apologize. So I had them confused with Wash U, who's in the bracket below them. So they're playing DePaul. They're at Oshkosh, so it's very winnable. They beat DePaul, so be it. They're either playing Oshkosh or Calvin. I don't have a problem with that. They could have been shipped to Wash U. There's not many places Gustavus was going to get to. Does that make sense? So I don't have a major issue there. Another question. This is my first year really watching games all year. I hear all the transportation costs affect the bracket as opposed to D1. Yeah, please do not compare to D1. Be interesting to see if they use the same criteria as D1 about the brackets would look like. What would the brackets look like if they use the criteria D1? We'd have the brackets of dreams if they use D1 stuff, but we don't have neutral sites, which D1 is full of. We don't have endless amounts of money to pay for hotel rooms for 3 nights for 4 teams, let alone the ones we're paying for already. We don't have endless amounts of money for flights to get teams to wherever the heck we want to. It'd be very interesting to see what we could use if we use D1's mentality. But here's the thing. D1's mentality is used in one place and one place only. D1 basketball. D1 basketball. Notice I didn't say D1. D1 basketball. Maybe D1 baseball, because they bring in the money. They're the money revenue drivers of the NCAA. No, football's not a money revenue for the NCAA. The money revenue primarily is basketball, baseball, maybe softball. So they can do what they want with their money. We're getting a percentage of that. And so this is what we live with. This is what the rest of the division lives with. It's what Division II lives with to some degree. The Division II selects their teams based on regions to keep things equal. We're not doing that anymore, at least. And in Division I, some of their tournaments are very geographical as well. Another tidbit is that Middlebury seems to have a good shot, pick them a reasonable path, and probably will play at home. Yep, as I said on the NCAA bracket show, Middlebury's men are in a very good position to get to Salem by staying at home. However, I would not say that they're protected or they're completely safe. I think they took the number 1 in the region, which makes perfect sense to me, and that's why they're in the upper right. They're protected more than Babson is for good reason. But they're going to have some tests in there. Williams is in there. Scranton and Oswego, if they get on a run, could be dangerous. Susquehanna's there. MIT has proven to be a big team killer. Newman's in there. So it's not going to be scot-free for Middlebury, but it's going to be fascinating to watch, to say the least. Got a contribution on the Hoopsville campaign. Thank you so much. Got 2 of them here just in the last few minutes. I certainly appreciate it from those of you who've donated. If you can donate more, and more of you can donate, we would certainly appreciate it as well. Going to check around, see if we got more questions before maybe we take a break here. What are your thoughts? The Marietta-Calvin game. Marietta's got to watch what they did not do what they did last year, and that is not be prepared to play. Now, I know there was an injury involved in that, but they also weren't really ready for Gwinnett and Mercy. They got to take Calvin seriously. Calvin's been a bit of a streaky team, but they've been a good team, despite what some of their fans would like to say. Beating Hope for the championship says a lot to me. They need to be smart. Absolutely need to be smart. How about those Cavs, Dave? Back in the dance. I'm sure Mr. Chris Pasowski is smiling. Love the world. Cabrini-esque. Congratulations to Cabrini. Certainly earned their way in despite a loss to Gwinnett and Mercy in the semis. We had predicted them last night as well. I really think they're a good team. I don't think they're as good as they were back in the day. I think they're more exposed. If they get out of the first weekend, to be honest with you, I think I might be surprised. And that's not a knock on them. They've got a tough bracket. They'd have to get past Middlebury, right? I mean, and Lycoming's not going to be easy for Cabrini either. That's a terrific first-round game up at Middlebury. Lyco and Cabrini with 2 teams, and both conferences want to prove something. And I love that matchup. So yeah, not overly surprised, but I'm looking forward to seeing what may happen out of there. Looking around to see if we got more questions. Tweet us at D3Hoops or hashtag Hoopsville. Email us hoopsville at D3Hoops.com or join us on Facebook at Facebook.com/Hoopsville. Zach Snyder, I love you. I tweeted out that the show is on the air. Zach says, AKA the show where Dave has to explain yet again how the D3 tournament works. You know what? I almost ought to record segments and just re-air them and save my voice. You may notice my voice is a little worn out. Being sick last week has not helped this weekend at all. Lou, you are welcome. So yeah, definitely, I would definitely agree with that statement, Zach. And Zach, tip of the hat to you for that, sir. I really appreciate it. Let's see here. Trying to see if we got more tweets. If you have them, send them to us. If there are any team reactions like we got from the Corsairs, let us know as well. I try and follow Twitter as much as I can, but on a day like today, it is insane. Does Ramapo get out of the weekend? Ramapo better get out of the weekend. I think this is set up for Ramapo to make a statement. If Ramapo can't get out of this weekend, then we've got a problem in the NJAC. The knock on the NJAC the last, let's say 10 years, has been that it's as good as it is in the regular season. It never proves itself in the postseason, right? Stockton's the only team to get out of the first weekend, yet get out of the first round in 10 years. Ramapo has had it set up on a tee for them numerous years, and they have yet to hit it. And I understand Governor Christie had something to do with it a few years ago, but that's, in the grand scheme of things, not an excuse. You have to win the games when they're put in front of you. I think this is ripe for the taking for Ramapo, and if they do not take advantage of it, we're going to be right back into this conversation of going, what up? And here's why I think it's ripe for the taking. Nothing against Misericordia, but Misericordia has not seen a team like Ramapo. The problem with Ramapo is they can't play down to Misericordia. If Ramapo can be smart, be good at home, they can roll through that. Amherst and Keene State's on the other side, and I understand that sounds daunting. But if Ramapo's as good as advertised at 25 wins and at that point 26, they should be able to handle Amherst. It's not a knock on Amherst. Amherst is 8-6 since we turned the page to 2017. It's not like Amherst isn't beatable, right? So if Ramapo is as good as advertised, I think the committee has done a good job of saying, go take it. If you want it, go take it. So they can get out of the weekend, and then they're on the other side of Swarthmore. If this isn't set up, well, with Christopher Newport potentially, if this isn't set up for a Ramapo-Christopher Newport game, I mean, this is an outstanding opportunity for both these units. Somebody's going to be disappointed, yes, but I expect Ramapo to get out of the weekend. If they cannot get out of the weekend, I'm going to be disappointed in the Roadrunners. I know that sounds unfair with Amherst on the other side, but I think Amherst is beatable. And I think they're beatable by more than NESCAC teams. So we'll see what else that could be. But that's my thought. I think Ramapo can get out of the weekend. Interesting stat. Calvin men's basketball has won their first round game the last 6 trips to the NCAA tournament, folks. Marietta fans, get your ears perked. Calvin has won the first round game the last 6 times they've appeared in the NCAA tournament. That's a great stat. Great stat. I'm looking around to see if we got more questions. I hope I got that one answered for you. May take a break here just to save my voice and get going on some other topics. Still looking around for more questions. What are your thoughts about Middlebury from Newman and what makes them so tough? I'm assuming, Tom, you're asking what about Middlebury from a Newman's point of view, what makes them so tough. But clarify for me, Tom. Are you asking about Middlebury and Newman or Middlebury from a Newman point of view? What exactly are you asking there for? Just let me know. Newman versus Middlebury, book it. I think it could possibly be Newman-Middlebury. I just think Newman's got a weekend there that anybody's got a chance at it. Again, if you got questions, email us, hoopsville@d3hoops.com. You can tweet us at D3Hoopsville or join us on Facebook at facebooklive.com/Hoopsville. We're also on YouTube, and we hope you're enjoying the show. We'll talk to the committee chairs coming up later in the program. Gordon Mann will join us to me later, though I know he's working on some issues on the back end of the website, so we'll let him do those when he's got that opportunity. On that note, we're going to take a quick break just to catch our breath, and we'll be back to answer more of your questions. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the WBCA and ABC studios. More Hoopsville bracket special after this.
My name is Marcus Walker. I was All-State, won a state championship, a high school All-American, and played college and pro ball. I I play because I love the game. I grind to be the best. I sweat because I put in work. I'm strong because I believe. When I want to bring it before game time, I come to the house that college basketball built, the CBE. No matter your skill, take it to another level. Elevate your game right here at the College Basketball Experience at Sprint Center.
Defining moments. Championship dreams. Share the experience with your family and friends. The 2017 NCAA Division III Men's Basketball Championship, March 17th and 18th at the Salem Civic Center in Salem, Virginia. Visit ncaa.com/tickets for your tickets today.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's 800 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over a decade. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're at d3hoops.com at www.d3hoops.com.
Great moments are born from great opportunity. That's what you have here tonight. That's what you've earned here tonight. This is your time. Now go out there and take it.
And I'm back. Hello. If you've got questions for us, tweet us at D3Hoopsville or hashtag Hoopsville. Email us, hoopsville at d3hoops.com. Join us on Facebook, facebook.com/Hoopsville. Lots to talk about, and we hope that you will join us somehow, some way. If you've got questions, we will certainly try and answer them. Normally, we've thrown some coaches into this show on Mondays. I'll be honest, it's hard to do that, but we will do our best. Or I should say it's hard to do when we're trying to schedule it out. So that's why we don't have them today. But we'll certainly do our best on Thursday to get a lot of our coaches on. We will get the committee chairs. One of the coaches has got a team in the tournament. The other one does not. You may have already answered. I signed off for a sec. What do you think of Northwestern? Can they pull an upset over Whitewater? Well, if there's one team we will never discount, it's Northwestern. If anybody remembers, they have given a few teams in the first round a run for their money and even beaten St. Thomas, one of the biggest upsets in tournament history. So, yeah, I'd give Northwestern a chance against Whitewater. The only thing about Whitewater that I've been concerned about much of the season is I can't get a read on them. I know they started the season strong, but they did not exactly have a lot of competition or tough competition. We're so used to a better strength of schedule, and at the beginning of the season, it didn't seem to be there. They hit the WIAC and stumbled in their first 3 games. They've certainly got back on their feet, but they've been inconsistent to some degree. I think Northwestern's going to have a chance. But if Whitewater is as good as others would argue they are, I don't see Northwestern winning that. But again, that's why they play the games. But we've seen Northwestern nearly pull this off almost every year. So I'm not going to jump and say, ain't going to happen. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it will definitely help. Looks like 5 flights for second weekend on women's right side. Only tough Scranton within 500 miles of each other. I didn't see it that way, but I'll certainly look at it. Yes, I do know the upper right is screaming flights. And clearly the committee, we'll talk to the committee chair about that because St. Thomas, Guilford, Puget Sound, and Trinity and/or Texas Dallas are not close to each other. I think this is how they're taking care of some of the isolations out there. We've had that before. Remember when Christopher Newport upset, I think it was LaGrange, or was it LaRoche? LaGrange. We couldn't go to Thomas More as predicted. We ended up going out to, I think it was Puget Sound, or was it George Fox? George Fox. So certainly I see 4 flights there. I don't see a problem there. I think that was coming. As far as the other side, yeah, that's fascinating too. Tufts and Scranton. But here's the thing. Tufts and Scranton, if they move on, it'll guarantee that that's where it'll be hosted. What it is definitely screaming out loud to us is that the NCAA has loosened that purse string a little bit. That might anger those in the Northwest. But here's the deal. They loosen the purse string for variety throughout the tournament, not to just have carte blanche flights. If we took care, again, if those were 2 flights out there, we need some flights somewhere else. If you look at this bracket, there's not a lot of options that aren't going to mean some flights in the second weekend. As women's basketball's gotten stronger, that's what happens. The committee, the liaison, especially on the women's side, we've seen them get cut down in the past, wouldn't just carte blanche allow flights if it didn't, if it just wasn't going to need to happen. Let's see here. I thought I saw another question. With low win-loss penalty, maybe Eau Claire. Oh, this is an ongoing conversation that I just can't get into. How far do you project Puget Sound to advance? Well, Lee, I mean, that's always hard. They should get out of the weekend if they're as good as advertised. I know that means taking on the rest of the Northwest and Whitman and George Fox. And then I think you got a potentially a massive game between Puget Sound and Trinity or Puget Sound and Texas Dallas, barring any upsets. Honestly, Puget Sound's going to earn it, plain and simple. They're gonna play Santa Cruz, which may not seem like a big deal, but we don't know a lot about Santa Cruz. They're then going to play a conference foe who knows them well in the second round. They're then going to play Trinity, Texas, or Texas Dallas, unless there's an upset in the third round. And then they're probably going to get either Guilford, maybe Albright, Chicago, or St. Thomas in the next round. If Puget Sound gets to Grand Rapids, they will have earned it. I don't feel comfortable saying I know how far Puget Sound's going to go here because I think there's some intriguingly good matchups all the way through. And I said a little awkwardly on the live show or on the bracket show that the best teams are only vulnerable to the best teams. Well, Puget Sound's going to face a lot of best teams, and we'll see if it makes them vulnerable. My gut feeling says that Sweet 16 game is going to be epic. If they get past that, the Elite 8 game is going to be insane. We're going to have some good second weekend basketball on the women's side, I figure. I think we're going to have some really good basketball. I thought I saw another question, so I'm looking back over my shoulder just to confirm. Hope women have a tough pot at St. Thomas against Whitewater. Intrigued by your thoughts. Yeah, they do. Plain and simple. And I think 2 reasons here. One, the one thing we kind of saw a while back when we're looking at the Great Lakes was it was going to be very hard for the Great Lakes teams to avoid each other based on geography. There's only so many teams we can get to so many places. And so, Hope was in a position to maybe host, maybe not host. I think there's a lot going on there. But Hope losing the last 2 games put them in this situation, to be blunt. If they lose 2 out of 3, maybe they're not in as bad a position. Meaning getting to the conference championship and losing there instead. But I think losing the last 2 games had them plummet in the regional rankings and set up a scenario where they've got to... they kind of have to, they're getting a tough matchup here. Whitewater losing in the semifinals also set that up. What I like here is that we got some variety. Whitewater going to Thomas More is nice. Hope going to Thomas More is nice. What I also think about that is that Thomas More is not being protected. It's not a bad thing necessarily. I think it's a test. I think that's a legitimate test, and I think I'm fine with that. It's going to be a tough second-round game, no matter who Thomas More faces. Assuming Thomas More gets round 1, no disrespect to their opponent, but the way Thomas More has played basketball over the years, I will take my bet on that one. Let's see here. Well, the odds is Oswego can make a deep run and hopefully win. Oswego's its own worst enemy. They got a great player in Brian Sortino, but this season has shown me that sometimes they're not all there. And it's nothing against a shot at Jason Leone or squad. I like them. I liked them at the beginning of the season. And they started the season lousy. And late in the season, when I think they were in position to dominate the East and even be a host, they went 2-2 in 2 weeks. Or in 1 week and 2 weekends. I think they're their own worst enemy. That said, if you look at what they've got to deal with, they're going to have some challenges, but it's winnable for them. Scranton's an enigma. I've seen Scranton. And I know the Royal fans are going to lose their mind, but I wasn't exactly blown away with Scranton. You could argue I saw him, was it mid-January or so? But even watching video, I'm not blown away by Scranton. What I'm impressed by Scranton is that they were able to beat Susquehanna twice. So I don't know if that's a matchup thing or what, but they beat Susquehanna twice. They earned that landmark conference championship, and they jumped to number 2 in the region. They were 6th in week 1 and went to number 2. That's pretty impressive. I think they will have trouble with Brian Sortino. I don't know anybody on Scranton's team off the top of my head who's going to be that good a defender on Sortino. I don't think they've seen any player like Brian Sortino. That's why I favor Oswego here. Now, this game should have been at Scranton, and Scranton certainly would have maybe had the added benefit of that, but being that it's an odd year numbers-wise, this is going to us. The Scranton host had to go to Williams. What I really find interesting is Oswego's going to have to potentially play Williams at Williams, and Williams is on a roll recently. Is Williams overrated? I don't know. The NESCAC was deep this year, and as many pointed out, remember, NESCAC getting 5 teams in. What the NESCAC did do that no one's given them credit for is all their teams won non-conference games. It's not like Amherst or Williams or Middlebury or so-and-so went out there and scheduled some, games that were winnable to boost their SOS. They all scheduled games that they all won. We're talking 8 teams worth of good wins. Oswego's got its hands. This is a good bracket for Oswego. They got to prove themselves. I like it. I think this is good for them. Tom, I know you keep asking me. I assume you said, I think we have a good squad. Just curious how far you think we go. I assume you're a Newman fan and wondering how they'll do against Middlebury. I think Middlebury has handled some really good teams this year. And by handled, I mean, it wasn't a game. Blew them out. I think Newman's going to find a beast in Middlebury, especially if that game's in Vermont, which it should be. You say all the host schools in the top left bracket win this weekend. Where do you think the next weekend will go on the men's side? That's a really good question. If all the top seeds go, it will probably go to Marietta because they are the highest ranked team of the 4 that you can get a bus to. Rochester can get to Marietta. So most likely that means Whitman, Hardin-Simmons, Marietta, and Rochester all in Marietta. It is a small little town in southern Ohio, folks. But that would be an awesome weekend of basketball. There's an outside chance it would go to Rochester. Rochester could arguably maybe is the top seed in the East, though that loss to Emory is what's got me concerned. Rochester's got a better SOS, so there's also a chance it goes to Rochester. Rochester would be easier to fly into, that is for sure. The only way it gets to Whitman and or Hardin-Simmons, in my opinion, obviously it's going to Whitman. The only way I see that happening is if Rochester is upset by Albertus Magnus or Wesleyan, or Marietta is upset by Calvin or Guilford. Because then we removed the 500 miles becomes murky, and then it's going to Whitman. Well, let me put it this way. It better go to Whitman. But it's going to take some upsets to do that. And by the way, if there's 2 teams who are ripe for upsets, it's Marietta and it's Rochester. Why do I say that? Marietta was upset in the first round last year, and they got exposed midseason. They are not a perfect team. They absolutely got exposed in the middle of the season. And if teams see that and figure it out, it's going to be interesting. Rochester is showing they can be beat. Emory beat them. They're struggling down to the end, just as they did last year. So if there's 2 teams that could be upset, that sets up a weekend going to Whitman, those are the 2 teams. It's almost like a little joke from the committee without them realizing it. Let's see here. I saw another question. I want to get back to it if I can. Do you like Keene State men's pick? Sweet 16 last year. Well, we picked them. I I don't mind the pick. I think their numbers were a little gaudy, to be honest with you. I don't think they were as good as last year, but I think the Northeast had some pretty gaudy numbers, thanks in part to the NESCAC, but I think it's good. I think that's a good first-round game for them, too. I have no problems with that. I mean, would I like to not have a Northeast game? Yeah. But we had so many Northeast teams, and I think it was a little bit hard to avoid. I certainly don't think Ramapo deserved to have Keene State or Amherst as their first-round game. I think Misericordia is the right team in the right spot there. Keene State could pull the upset because we know they can, but I think Amherst might win that one and then set up that game with Ramapo I was talking about earlier. See if we got any other questions here. Can you talk about Whitman's men's path through the Elite Eight? Obviously, beating Whitworth again will be a tough. So, yeah, I didn't talk, as I was just talking about the chance of them hosting. I didn't really talk about Whitman. Whitman's going to have to get past Whitworth for the fourth time this season, assuming they get past Rhodes. They can't look past Rhodes just because you got to be smart here. Beating a team fourth time is going to be hard, but they've certainly handled Whitworth. But Whitworth's going to be out for blood because, remember, Whitman did this to Whitworth last year. Whitman knocked off Whitworth in almost the exact same position, and they would love to do it and return the favor. That fourth game is going to be a slugfest. I don't think Whitman's guaranteed into the next weekend. In Elite Eight, I don't even think they're guaranteed in Elite Eight because Hardin-Simmons, if you have not watched Hardin-Simmons, you are missing one of the most dynamic basketball players and most incredible teams in the country. Nathaniel Jack is an amazing player. And no one has an answer for Nathaniel Jack. And does Whitman have enough size inside to handle the other guys like Jones for Hardin-Simmons? Hardin-Simmons is a deeper, better, and more talented team than I think people give him credit for. I like Hardin-Simmons. I've liked Hardin-Simmons the entire season, despite a rough start when they were not fully healthy. There's guys who have had the early part of the season off might be in really good shape for this. Trick for Hardin-Simmons is they can't look past an Emory or Tech. You know, Emory's might be a real tough test for Hardin-Simmons, but Hardin-Simmons-Whitman will be a battle, a real battle. Let's see here if there's other questions. When did the ODAC become a one-team league? Yeah, Ryan Scott answered it on Twitter last year. Remember, Lynchburg was the only team in last year, and the only way they were getting a second was if Randolph pulled the upset. ODAC was screaming one-bid league unless Guilford lost as well. Nothing against the ODAC. It is a very good conference. It absolutely is. It's just that the top isn't as good or as competitive as it has been. And I think the middle has soured a little bit too. And I think you can point to Randolph-Macon. Randolph-Macon being in first place in the conference for as long as they were and up in that conversation, Randolph-Macon's a good team, but they're not that good. They're good next year. Watch out for them next year. This year was kind of a retooling, rebuilding year, and they were at the top of the conference. Guilford's up there, and they're also taking hits. And I'm not saying the conference isn't competitive at all, but if this is a 2 or 3 bid league, there are 2 or 3 teams who are dominating. Virginia Wesleyan was not that competitive this year. If they're competitive and it's them and Guilford pulling away from the rest, then it's a 2-bid league. If Randolph-Macon, like next year, is really good and it's a 3-bid team or 3-team league, it doesn't mean the middle and the bottom aren't still competitive. It's just that the top kind of came down, the middle has soured a little bit, and it just goes through cycles. Remember, the WIAC was a 1-bid league last year. It goes through cycles. CCIW, it was a 2-bid league this year, but one would argue we're used to 3. So it happens, and I'm not overly surprised by that in any way, shape, or form. Let's see if there's any other questions on the Twitter, and then I'll go check out some of the other things. Then we'll take a break. Maybe we'll get Wags in here to react initially. Check our email, make sure we didn't get any questions there, and we do. I'm relatively new to this and wanted to say you do a great job. Well, thank you, Ethan. I know that you're not a big fan of the NEAC conference. Great Gallaudet grad here. Well, thank you, Ethan. I might have to answer this via email, though, but I did hear some good props of Morrisville for some recent success. Is there an issue with the conference at a top-bottom situation, a weak type or a typically very weak to middle bottom? I know that Lancaster was quite competitive last year during the regular season, and their opening game in Morrisville had a couple of Sweet 16 appearances recently. Ethan, if you can hear this, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'll try and remember to email you. The NEAC is really poor, middle, and bottom. They have some teams at the top who have risen and done well. Morrisville State's gotten to the Sweet 16 a couple times. Lancaster Bible got to the second round last year after a miraculous season, suffering their first loss in the second round. And the top teams always seem to at least make a flash and a splash, and it's nice to see. But after the first team or the second team, nothing to write home about. The NEAC's a very poor conference in terms of competitiveness and in terms of talent and skill. Maybe that's changing, but that's where they are right now. Any idea what we can find locations of the second round women's games? Second round women's games are at the hosts of the first round games. So that's pretty simple. The weekend games are at whoever is hosting those games. So, for example, Amherst is hosting Regis, Mary Washington, Sage colleges. Second round game is in Amherst. The hosts are based on a weekend set. So your hosts for the weekend are Amherst, FDU Florham, Montclair, Ithaca, Ohio Northern, SUNY Geneseo, Christopher Newport, Thomas More, WashU, Wisconsin Oshkosh, Scranton, Tufts, Texas Dallas, Puget Sound, Guilford, St. Thomas. Win or lose. Greg asks, thoughts on Benedictine? I follow Central pretty closely and think Benedictine is under the radar. Although they lost Lucas Johnson from last year's team, they're balanced and talented. However, tough to get out of the River Falls pod. River Falls is very difficult to play, talented, relentless effort. Benedictine's under the radar. I can appreciate that. I remember sitting at the championship game and Ryan Scott turning to me and going, they pretty much bring everybody back next year. Yeah, I think they're underrated. They're going to have a tough pod here, but I think that's about right. I don't have a problem with it. It's tough with their criteria to protect them. So I think going through that's going to be tough. They're going to have a tough game with Wartburg to start with, and they're going to have River Falls, and that's going to be an awesome second-round game. And if Benedictine is off the radar, they'll beat River Falls. If they're not off the radar, or they'll at least give River Falls a heck of a game. If they're not on the if they're off the radar for a reason, River Falls should be able to dispatch them. I think that's a good test for Benedictine to prove maybe they're better than people think they are. Agree Whitewater is difficult to predict. They started slow, incorporating 2 D1 transfers. They have size and shooting, but a little focus on defense. I'll tell you now, defense is important. Another question from Frank. What do you think of Benedictine? Great year, tough draw with River Falls in round 2. Talk a little Midwest basketball if you can. Yeah, again, I think Benedictine's a good team. I don't see a reason. I mean, here's the deal. The reason they're in this boat with River Falls is their criteria isn't great, and then they lost a couple games they shouldn't have this year. If they were as good as last year, and I'm not talking to the extent of going undefeated, because they had a great non-conference schedule that was going to be a test, but they should have gone through the conference undefeated. I think losing a game in the conference hurt them criteria-wise, and maybe they aren't heading to River Falls here. You know, Whitewater isn't necessarily fair, but they could have gone there, or they could have been the host for a WashU pod, for example. But I think they're in the right spot for what their criteria is screaming at us. If they are as good as many would argue they are, which I totally understand the argument, then in that case, Benedictine will get through this and surprise River Falls. But that's what happens when you lose a game or two here that you shouldn't lose. Plain and simple. Let's see here. Any other questions? I believe there were. I thought I saw another email. Nope. I'll check another thing and we'll take a break. Mike asked one more question. They pull ups. One last question. They pull upsets, but what do they have to do to pull this one? He's talking about Keene. Oh, they're going to have to dictate the tempo and the style of play against Amherst. They can't let Amherst control things. If Amherst is able to play with their guard play and their inside presence and control things, and especially control Keene on defense, Keene's got probably no chance. One thing I've noticed with Amherst, I don't know why, but I feel like they get exposed inside. And I could be wrong. Maybe somebody who knows Amherst, because they watch them every day, could tell me better. But when I've watched Amherst, I'm not blown away with inside game. And I feel like they get exposed. Babson is a tough game to compare him with because that's when Amherst was playing well. But then, they struggled in 2017. And every time I watched him, especially in losses, there was something about him that didn't blow me away. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there's something about the inside game to me it didn't seem to click. And maybe I'm misreading him. I might be misreading. I've struggled with Amherst for a couple weeks now, trying to get a grip on what they do or aren't doing. And But and it's kind of a cop-out answer I can appreciate, but if Keene can control things, if they are able to slow Amherst down and get them out of rhythm on their offensive side, I don't think Amherst has answers. Coach Hickson's one of the best in the country. He'll certainly make adjustments. But I haven't seen Amherst, when taken out of their rhythm or taken out of what they want to do offensively, able to adjust this year or at least adapt like they need to. Defensively, you're going to have to score. Keene State's going to have to score on the offensive end to force Amherst into some changes defensively. They can't just stop Amherst on the offensive end and then not worry about offense. This can't be a defensive slugfest for Keene State to win, because Amherst does have a few weapons that can hit the right shot, but they can play defense. Keene's going to have to do some stuff on the offensive end to warrant Amherst falling apart. Say all host schools in the top left. Okay, a very small gym though. Thanks for the response. Who has a small gym, William? I know you were talking about the upper left, but who's got the small gym? Marietta, Rochester. Yeah, none of them have huge gyms, but they all have plenty of seating. They're all above the minimums. There's no problems that I can see in hosting scenarios unless there's some upsets we don't see in the future. For example, Albertus Magnus isn't going to host, but their gym's too small for the second weekend. So Marietta's got a one-sided gym, but it's plenty big. Rochester's got the Palestra, still plenty big. There's no, and then Hardin Simmons and Whitman's gyms are certainly in good shape. I don't see a problem there. Got a couple more questions, then we'll take another break. Sorry, I meant locations of the sectionals. Hold on, John, I got to find you. Oh, sectional weekend. We'll technically find out on Sunday after the games are complete, but we can kind of read the tea leaves. The way the NCAA does it, the teams on the upper part are your usual hosts, or top ranked. So Amherst is would be in the running to host. Ithaca, Montclair, and FDU could all get there, plus everybody else who's in the bracket can get to them. In the upper right, St. Thomas is the one that's in that weird one that will require flights. By the way they're doing it here, St. Thomas would be the host, though I wouldn't be surprised if Puget Sound or Trinity made an argument for it. I'd have to look at the data. But St. Thomas being undefeated, I have a feeling, and I may have said something different here, that St. Thomas would host Guilford, Puget Sound, and Trinity. In the lower left, Ohio Northern's got the better numbers here, and I find this interesting because Thomas More has been ahead of Ohio Northern most of the way. And Christopher Newport can't get to Ohio Northern. They can't get to Thomas More. Ooh, we got an interesting one here. I think Christopher Newport, they can get to Geneseo. Oh, I kid you not. If those four came out, I think Geneseo becomes the host. If Ohio Northern, Geneseo, Newport, and Thomas More came out of that weekend, Geneseo very well could be hosting. That is a fascinating consideration right there, folks. And it's based on geographics. Because I know Christopher Newport can't get to Ohio Northern. I know Christopher Newport can't get to Thomas More. I'm quite confident Christopher Newport can get to Geneseo because I know Christopher Newport can get to Oswego, and Geneseo's closer. So, and then I know, I'm willing to bet Ohio Northern and Thomas More can bust to Geneseo. So Geneseo is looking like the host in the lower left, if everything remained equal. And in the right, you got Tufts, Scranton, Oshkosh, and WashU. We were just talking about how this looks like it's probably going to go to Tufts, considering the fact, now there's a caveat, and I'll get to that in a minute. But Tufts, because Scranton is probably not ranked higher than Tufts, and Oshkosh and WashU are going to have to fly anyway. However, men take priority. So the Tufts men came out and were in position to host, and I don't know if they are, but if they were, Tufts women would not be able to host. It would maybe go to Scranton. Again, depending on some upsets. Can you talk about Rochester's pod? Do you know much about their first couple of games? Men or women? Men or women? Back to the Benedictines, said their first loss in conference was against Concordia, Wisconsin, team that is on the rise. They have had another battle with them yesterday. Yes, I understand they're on the rise. I'm not discounting the fact that they lost. What I'm saying is if you wanted a better situation for them, they couldn't lose. So if you want to have a situation where Benedictine's going to play a better team or go to a better spot, or maybe as a recipient of the hosting in a Wash U pod, because Wash U can host, they needed to win that game. That's what I'm saying, is that loss is what's hurting them on the criteria, is all I'm saying. I'm not knocking Concordia, Wisconsin, and I'm not saying they're not an up-and-coming team. I get that. But that's what's hurting Benedictine. Going to take another break. When we come back, we'll answer more of your questions. Working our way to seeing a committee chair here soon. We may even get one of the guys on the show to join us as well. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the WBCA and ABC studios.
I used to never really talk. Ever. I was afraid if I said something wrong, everyone would laugh at me. But then I started to play golf with Special Olympics. It helped me to find my voice. And now everyone else is speechless.
This is why we love sports. It's in the way they play, free from the pressures and all the money talk. Playing for simply the love of the game, where everyone has a shot at their definition of success on and off the field. This is what we love about sports, and what we can still love about college sports.
At George Fox University, our promise is that every student will be known, personally, academically, and spiritually. To be known means professors and staff know you by name. It means you're valued, encouraged, and challenged. It means we'll listen to you and with you as you pursue God's call in your life. At George Fox University, you will never be a number. You will be known. Visit georgefox.edu to learn more.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's 800 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over a decade. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're at D3Hoops.com at www.D3Hoops.com.
So, hey, welcome back to Hoopsville. You got questions for us about the brackets? Email us, hoopsville at D3Hoops.com. Join us on Facebook, facebook.com/Hoopsville. You can also tweet us at D3Hoopsville or hashtag Hoopsville. All that information scrolling at the bottom of your screen. There is a YouTube chat room. I'll certainly do my best if I can there. Update. So I was talking about the lower left bracket of the women's side, saying Geneseo might host because Christopher Newport could get there. Turns out I'm mistaken. That's 5:09, so it's going to take a flight. So we now have 2 pods on the women's side. They're going to take 3 flights if everything holds equal. That surprises me. I don't know what to think about that, to be honest with you. Sorry, answering some questions here, folks. Should be hearing from Gordon Mann here soon. We'll talk more about this bracket coming up. Women's bracket, women's committee chair will join us, and men's committee chair will join us here very soon. Oh, got Gordon. Sorry, just doing multiple things. Sorry, I'm doing 3 things at the same time. Gordon, I see you. Just need to get you. There we go. Drop your camera a little bit, buddy. Sorry, doing on-air stuff, which is kind of a little bit off-putting for me. Talking to Gordon through the chat page. Give me a second. I'm shutting something up. There he is. So we will go to Gordon here, who's joining us on the Skype. Let me try that again. He's joining us via the D3, City of Salem Hoops Skype hotline. It's been a long weekend, Gordon. How you doing, bud?
I'm all right. How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. So something that's just kind of developed, and we'll start here if you don't mind.
Sure.
We've got the potential of 6 flights staring us down on the women's side in weekend number 2. The upper right, I can't see where that's not going to need 3 flights when you got Texas, Washington State, Minnesota, and Guilford. And then the lower left, Ryan just reminded me, Geneseo's 509 to Christopher Newport. And we know Christopher Newport can't get to Thomas More. So this is, another question to ask the committee chair, but I don't see, now granted, upsets can change things, but I still don't see a lot of change here. Maybe the purse is a little bit looser than we thought, which begs the question, then why do we still have 3 teams in the Northwest?
Yeah, so looking at that, I guess the short answer is I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of what their other options would have been. They could have put SUNY Geneseo in the pod with Tufts and Scranton, but you're still missing a fourth pod there. Looking at how else could you have structured this so that the Geneseo pod winner doesn't have to fly somewhere? If you shift them over to the lower right, you take either the Wisconsin or the St. Louis pod out. One of those still that might save you 1 flight. Yeah, maybe they might have a little more flexibility this year.
Is it maybe a sign that we've been making an argument for a while that we're starting to see more good teams in women's basketball around the country, and thus we're getting a chance to now see a bracket that can be a little bit more diversified as a result?
Yeah, I think we certainly did this year. I mean, you have the 4 undefeated teams from Minnesota, Massachusetts, Ohio, and Kentucky. So you are getting something of a spread there. The teams in the Northwest Conference are solid. There's a bit of a gap in the true South. The Virginia, Texas, right now at least. And there's certainly enough teams in the Mid-Atlantic where you can, Scranton and Christopher Newport and those schools. I do think you have more teams at the top, in the top 10, in the top 6 to 7, that I think are really, really good this. One team in the Northeast, or 1 team in the Northeast and 1 in the Mid-Atlantic.
Talking to Gordon Mann via Skype. Appreciate him taking the time, and it's certainly going to be fascinating to watch how this all breaks down. Sticking with the women's side for starters, let's just look at a couple other things. First off, we missed 2 teams. George Fox ended up getting in, which meant the committee at least respected their SOS and didn't punish them necessarily for having 3 teams or games against non-Division IIIs. I have really no opinion of that. I'm just glad to see it. I think it's a good sign. It can go either way on that. Then the other one we missed was Calvin leapfrogging Carnegie Mellon, and I remember seeing a message when I woke up this morning from you with that, maybe they can do that.
Yeah, it was something we caught, far too late into the night and too late into the process, but the thinking there is probably Calvin beats Hope, which is a win against a regionally ranked opponent, and then they lose to Trine, so they're 1-1. And last week the UAA teams only had 1 game playing their travel partner, so Carnegie beat Case, which isn't regionally ranked. So that was enough to overcome what's generally a pretty weak strength of schedule index for Calvin. They're below 500 there. But I don't have a big problem with that one way or the other. I think that's a toss up if you want to say that, Carnegie Mellon had lots of chances, against regionally ranked opponents. It's the silver lining of playing in the UAA, and candidly lost a lot of games against those teams. It's disappointing that there wasn't a slot for them, because they played well in the tournament last year. They were a Sweet 16 team. They've got Lisa Murphy, who's will be up for Player of the Year. But some of those weekends where they lost games that they theoretically shouldn't have come back and haunt them. And I don't have a problem, as we talked about last night. George Fox, the only team when we had the Bruins on the table with Calvin and 6 other teams, we said, look, the only team in this group that could play with them is Calvin. The rest, there was Moravian, Concordia of Wisconsin, a bunch of other schools that we weren't really in the Bruins weight class. And we said, if we look just objectively at the numbers, George Fox has fewer games, and that's not their fault. They're on a geographic island. They do generally try and travel. They seem to have struck up a travel relationship with Trinity of Texas, which is a good matchup for both schools. But we didn't know if the committee would be able to get around that. And candidly, I'm glad they did. No offense to WPI, which looks like the school that, at least by our projections, that were left out. But George Fox plays in a much tougher conference. I think George Fox is a much deeper pedigree and forced to pick who has a chance to make a run deeper. Perhaps setting aside the fact that George Fox is going to end up playing Whitman and then probably Puget Sound in back-to-back weeks. I think if you're trying to get, and you're not trying to get the best 64 teams here. That's not what this is. The Division III is about access to championships. So everybody needs to get equal access, even if they're clearly not one of the best 64 teams. No offense to Regis, but they're clearly not one of the best 64 teams in the country. But they need to have the same access to the championship that everybody else does. But once you get beyond that and you get to the at-large bids, you want the best teams. And as we said last night, I would take George Fox over really anybody that we had them at the table with in almost any setting imaginable.
Yeah, it's an interesting point of view. I mean, I have no qualms with George Fox being in there either. 6-1 really when it came down to it, trying to read the tea leaves. I find it interesting that Calvin with a below 500 SOS got in, but the women have done that. That's nothing new for them. And you're right. Some of the other criteria kind of jumps out and says, hey, I will miss seeing Lisa Murphy in the tournament. That is for sure. But they've got some ECAC hopes. And maybe even hosting, so hopefully they rally for that in her final games. I got a couple other questions. I thought one of them was women, so bear with me here as I try and remember which emails I was clicking on where. Nope, that was men, so there you go. When you look at the overall bracket, though, does anything jump out at you as being wrong? I kind of feel like outside of a couple of little minor things, it seems like a pretty balanced bracket for a team.
Yeah, no, I like the fact that they've got Amherst and Tufts separated. I like the fact that they've got the 3 UAA teams separated, although, Rochester with their record really doesn't merit protection, so to speak. But I like the fact that, Chicago and WashU wouldn't see each other in the second round or so. The 3 first-round matchups that really jump out at me as being, kind of second-round matchups that will happen in the first round. Most of them are understandable. Trine, Illinois Wesleyan. Illinois Wesleyan was one of the final picks, and I think that's a really good game. But Illinois Wesleyan got in with 9 losses, so when you're at that point, it's hard to complain. Hope and Whitewater. I know you talked about that one a little bit. And the other 2 were DePaul and Gustavus Adolphus. If there was one first round matchup that sort of made me scratch my head, it was that one, because both of those teams, Gustavus probably came off the board fairly early. DePaul was an at-large candidate. Gustavus was 4th or 5th maybe in the West. DePaul was probably 4th or 5th in the Great Lakes. But that's likely to be a matchup of when the final top 25 is announced. That's likely to be a 12 versus 13 matchup in the first round. And neither one of those teams really backed into the tournament. Gustavus was clearly going to be in it, and DePaul won their automatic qualifying bid. So that's the one first round matchup that I looked at and went, wow, that sort of surprised me. And geography works into this. Gustavus can get to Oshkosh. DePaul can get to Oshkosh. Again, Calvin is probably one of the last teams picked. So I don't know. I guess you could have flipped St. Norbert and sent DePaul to WashU, but they've already played each other. Maybe sent Gustavus to WashU. I guess that's not really any better. That's the one matchup that I look at and I go, gee, is there a way to have avoided that? And then the fourth one we talked about extensively already was Whitman and George Fox. And, part of me feels for the Northwest Conference teams in that they end up basically playing their conference tournament twice, once for real and then once in the NCAA tournament. But given the way we thought this is going, I think George Fox is probably happy to have a second go around at the conference tournament versus, cleaning out their lockers today.
Michael brings up, he says, one idea, and he's talking about the Northwest, is move a West team going to Minnesota. The problem is it's an extra flight. I mean, it's 2 flights to change the Northwestern equation. It's 2 flights because you got to fly one out and you got to fly a team in to replace them. And that's why they're not doing it. Now, it is a question considering that it looks like 6 flights potentially, and we got to play the games, but it looks like 6 flights the next weekend. But if they know they're going to have those 6 because they can't avoid them, because as you point out, it doesn't look like there's a lot of avoiding of those. And if they know they've got X amount of flights in the first round already, which is what, 2? They got Claremont. Well, 2 flights.
Claremont will fly. Yeah.
Yeah, they got 2 flights. So now we're adding 2 more. So we're doubling up the flights in the first round to 4. Now we're talking 10 flights before we get. That's probably where the NCAA said no. You either pick your poison. Well, they can't avoid it in the second weekend. They're going to have to swallow it in the first weekend. And that's just, it's unfortunate. Listen, you're not going to find us telling you it's not unfortunate. We get it. It's also just reality. And
is it 2 flights in the first round or 1? Claremont has to go to Texas. Santa Cruz
has got to go up. I don't think Santa Cruz can do it in 500. Okay. At least to Puget. But that's a good question. Certainly, if I can certainly check that one. Yep. No, I can't do it that way. Let me try one more way. There it is. It's amazing. Sometimes, a school's listed under one way, and then you go to another school like California. I got to go to California and then go to Santa Cruz. Geneseo, though, is not under SUNY first.
No, they're probably still under Geneseo State or whatever.
Yeah, they're under Geneseo first, which is interesting. Yeah, 839 miles.
Oh, yeah.
So
I guess my West Coast geography is lacking there.
I figured it was pretty far, but nonetheless. So another question I did get on Twitter said, do you think this is the year the Tommies women's finally get over the hill and win it all this time around? They're not going to have an easy way of it.
No, I mean you have St. Thomas and Wartburg, let's assume Wartburg beats Chicago, and that's not a guarantee. Chicago, beat WashU had one of the toughest schedules in the country. But let's just assume that for seeds play out here, St. Thomas would have to beat Wartburg. That's a rematch of last year's Sweet 16 game that Wartburg won up in St. Paul. Then they would play, if we're doing the seed game here, I guess they would play Guilford. I would think they would be the overwhelming favorite there. Then they would get somebody from the Northwest Conference, let's just say Puget Sound, and that's who they would get. So they would probably have to get through Wartburg, Guilford, and Puget Sound. Could happen. It could happen, but I view even their second round matchup as pretty much a toss up. I think Wartburg. I mean, we know Wartburg can beat them. It happened last year. The teams effectively had the same roster. So if they're going to get to Grand Rapids, they're going to earn it. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I think they've got the opportunity to prove themselves. The question
they're going to get all these games at home. That much we know. Obviously, they're not going to fly 3 teams to Tacoma for Puget Sound or to Guilford or to the Lone Star State. So they're going to get all these games at home. That Wartburg matchup is tough. That the way they're slotted there, that tells you that they viewed Wartburg basically as an 8 seed, which is I don't know.
Well, I also think we ran into some challenges up there too with geographic.
Yeah, good point.
Wartburg trying to get out of there and find someone to put them. I mean, that was my problem with Gustavus Adolphus. You got to put them somewhere, and you're right. It's either WashU or they're heading to Oshkosh. Yeah. And they probably felt they shouldn't play Oshkosh. They should play. It's just a matter of pick your poison. Yeah, there wasn't as many teams in that area to be able to diversify it as much as we'd like to have. I think that's something that's new too.
Right. Would have been nice from a bracketing perspective if, a second Iowa team gets in, Luther or something like that, to give you one more team that you can push somewhere else, move the piece of the board.
Got a couple men's questions. I'll figure maybe you can help me answer them as well. So we'll go through those. What are your thoughts on Scranton men? Sorry if you answered that earlier. Just hopped on the live broadcast. No problem. I'll let you answer this one first since I've already kind of had my thoughts.
I think they're out in the first round. I think Oswego State, who won last year on a neutral floor, they'll have some experience. That Scranton Oswego State game will be a lot of fun to watch. You got Brian Sortino on one side. You got John Victus on the other side. If they get by that, could they beat Williams? Yeah, but I think their chances of getting out of the weekend, if the Oswego State game is a coin flip, and if let's assume Williams beats Becker, the Williams game in Chandler Gymnasium on a Saturday is a coin flip, then their chances of still playing the next weekend are not real good. Now, if they got through, though, I like their chances against whoever comes out of the bracket above them, whether it's Susquehanna or MIT or Eastern. And then I actually like I think I would give them a puncher's chance against Middlebury, Lyco, Newman, Salisbury. So for Scranton, it may be get out of this weekend, and then you may have a shot. I would like their second weekend chances better than I like their first weekend chances.
Yeah, I think that game against Oswego is a must-watch game. I said earlier that I don't think they've got an answer for Brian Sortino.
I don't know how similar he is to Stephen Weidlich, who they played a couple of times.
He's on another level.
Yeah, okay.
He's on. Nothing against Weidlich. It's Sortino's on another level. 48 points in 27 minutes.
Certainly a bigger guy.
Yeah, he's definitely a bigger guy. He's very good with the basketball. He can be a shooter or a passer. And basically he has a little bit of Joey Flannery in him sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, this game will not end this way. And he will put it on the back, and he will take over if necessary. And
Scranton also doesn't have a great track record in recent tournaments for making really long trips. Last year it was Lynchburg. Year before that it was Hobart, I think, or they played Hobart at Brockport State or something.
It was Hobart at Brockport. Yep.
Yeah. So they've it's been a little while since they had that run where they beat Middlebury and Vermont, and then I think lost to Cabrini in the Elite Eight. That's a tough matchup for Scranton, and neither one of those schools is right next door to Williamstown. But I think it's a little easier drive for Oswego than it is for the Royals.
Yeah, the other thing, and I know I was getting in a back and forth with somebody on Twitter, and he's like, Scranton men keep getting hosed in the hosting. Yes, they turned out to be the number 2 in the region, but the women had the rights to host.
That's what happens when you share the gym with one of the most prolific women's programs in the sport.
Hey, Wash U deals with it too.
Very
And listen, he made an argument that the NCAA doesn't like him, and he said, what about 2014? Listen, 2014 was an unfortunate year. The NCAA needed a couple extra hosts like Emory in different places that we didn't expect and didn't like. Yeah. Scranton lost out, and they left somebody in the Atlantic Coast instead of Scranton. So be it. But it's not like they went and proved themselves by going up and losing to Hobart at Brockport. So
right.
Brockport was certainly deserving to host too. Somebody was going to get hosed. You could argue Scranton got hosed, but if they truly got hosed, they would have won. And by the way, Scranton kind of came out of nowhere. I've seen him in person, didn't blow me away. Vicus, certainly I like him, but I don't think they had anything else that said to me, oh, this is an NCAA tournament team this year. They're sitting 6th in the regional rankings week 1. I went, okay. And all of a sudden I went, wait, they're what?
Yeah.
So
they've come together down the stretch here. And so if you're looking for kind of intangible advantages, they've come together, and Oswego's sort of done the opposite, losing, they won their tournament this past weekend, but losing before that. So, I think that's the best games in the first round tend to be on the first night tend to be the neutral court games, because those are the teams that are closest together. There's not a home court advantage for either one. They're often two teams who haven't played each other during the regular season. Sometimes you get kind of weird contrasts in styles. Think Endicott and Salisbury type of thing. That'll be a fun game.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you there on all of those fronts. Rochester men, could you talk Rochester men's pod? How much do you know about these teams? Any chance they'll get through to host the next weekend? The hosting part, if all 4 teams would get through, I think it's a coin flip between them and Marietta.
Right.
I'm not sure off the top of my head which way that would go. If you want to talk about ease of access and getting teams in, it would be go to Rochester. And get them into the airport there a lot easier, or even Syracuse a lot easier than you can get them into Marietta. That being said, Marietta might have them on the criteria, except the SOS I know is in Rochester's favor.
Right.
But Gordon, your thoughts on at least Rochester's pod there? I find that one rather interesting.
Yeah, I think they could lose to I think they could lose to Albertus in the first round.
Yeah.
I think they could lose to Wesleyan in the second round. I'm assuming Wesleyan gets by Union here, although that's not a given. That's a tough draw. Albertus Magnus. from a conference that's kind of unheralded, but is generally a tough out in the tournament. Johnson of Wales reached a second weekend last year. Albertus Magnus basically lost at the buzzer to a real good Dickinson team the years before that, and Rochester is kind of quietly backed in here. They lost to Case Western, which wasn't a good loss. They lost to Emory, which isn't a bad loss, but isn't a great loss either. They have not played well down the stretch. They played real strong, and then split the weekend with Chicago and WashU, and fell behind Chicago big, and rallied to come back. But they're not coming in. They're not coming in with a lot of momentum here. The Plester will be loud. That's a long drive from basically New Haven, Connecticut to Western New York. But of the four teams who are hosts, I think they've got probably the second hardest chance to come out of there. I think Marietta comes out easily. I think Hardin-Simmons comes out, I don't know about easily. Whitman and Whitworth will be a blood feud one more time. But Rochester, again, I don't know that they beat Albertus Magnus in the first round. And if they do, Wesleyan's a tough second round matchup.
Yeah, Rochester first round. I said it on the air on the NCAA show that watch out for Albertus Magnus. If you're looking for an upset, that's the one to look for. We got a question about Albertus Magnus too, so it gives me a good chance to say it. They're a proven commodity. They certainly can play well. They may be off the radar right now because the heyday run from a couple years ago isn't in front of us. But that doesn't mean they're not in play here. And Rochester, it's 2 years in a row they've struggled down the stretch. To the same teams, they've struggled down the stretch. They were in better shape to get in the tournament this year. That is not a given in any way, shape, or form. By criteria, that's the right matchup. By on paper, that's a scary matchup if you're a Rochester fan. Other side, Union, Wesleyan, I think Wesleyan's got a lot to prove. I'm not saying Union's going to beat them, but I think of all the teams in the NESCAC who've got very little, who have not proven much in the tournament, it's Wesleyan. This is only their second trip. Nothing about their season except for a win over Marietta and a win over Amherst. I think the win over Amherst is a little suspect because we just don't know what Amherst is like anymore. It's not like I can say that I can translate that into anything. Okay, let's say they get past Union. Ta-da for Union having a great season. But they're going to run into a juggernaut of a game in Rochester or Albertus Magnus. So, that's a tough one.
You've got Wesleyans whose strength is generally down low, good low post players, and you've got Rochester whose strength is their point guard, Sam Bohr-Smith, or their guards. So, I think that's a matchup between NESCAC and a UAA school. So those are both deep conferences. There'll be a decided home court advantage for Rochester in that. I don't know that you're going to get a ton of people traveling from what's basically or less Hartford, Connecticut, Middletown to be exact, but center of Connecticut to New York. But that's a tough month. That will be if Rochester comes out to the second round, they'll have beaten two very good teams to get there.
As far as Rochester hosting, again, it's a coin flip between them and Marietta. I don't think you can really sit there and make it. That's pretty difficult to say the least. I know that we're still talking about the Northwest, and I'll answer what I wrote there. It says it seems to happen in the Northwest more than not. Sorry, you didn't mean to rant, but we're encouraging girls out here to go to D3 over NAI, and it just seems silly. Excuse me. Especially if you just ran D3 has more schools than D1 and D2. I get ex-players at all D3 schools, a huge letdown for them. Here's the deal. If you think this NCAA tournament structure is making them decide between a D3 school and an NAIA school, I think we're thinking about this a little too much. You're making the NCAA tournament, plain and simple. So that's the first thing. Second of all, you can throw a blanket over most of the other parts of the country, hit 50 teams in 5 conferences. You can't hit anything but the Northwest Conference for 800 miles because we just did the math. Puget Sound's 839 to Santa Cruz, or to Santa Cruz. And it's well over 1,000 down to Los Angeles. So, it happens in the Northwest, and it happens in Texas. But again, if we think this is a recruiting thing, this is why we're losing them to the NAIA, I can't help you there. We're not going to solve this.
Yeah, I don't think we have much of a sense for how does George Fox compare to pick an NAIA school in the Northwest.
Right.
And these 3 schools, or at least 2 of them, Whitman and George Fox, have been in the tournament a bunch recently. Puget Sound it's been a little bit longer for them. It's the same argument for the Texas schools. Now they only have two teams in the tournament this year, and they're both from different conferences. So it and you see this perpetually
but they play each other,
right? Yeah. So I don't know that I understand the frustration. I don't think there's a way to fix this. The economics of Division III is we're all living off the big contract that was signed with CBS, Turner, whoever that was, however many years ago.
Well, we just re-upped it, and that's maybe why we're getting a little more flights. There's a little bit more money in the coffer.
There you go.
But here's the thing, it says, we just ran an ad that D3's got more teams than D2 or D1. Yes, but most teams in D3 are central of the country east. If you want to compare numbers of the Appalachian and East and Appalachian West, it's 50-50, and the Appalachians on the East Coast. You take the Mississippi River, and 3/4 of Division III is sitting east of the Mississippi River. Yeah. So, we have a lot more schools, but there's less NAI in Division II east of that location. NAI in Division II tend to be out to the western part. That's just the way the makeup is, and we can't compare. Comparing is the death knell. But by the way, if we want to compare, D2, last I checked, still picks on a regional basis. X amount of teams from each region get in. Last I checked. I could be wrong, but last I checked. We had that process back in the 90s. It didn't matter how many teams were good or not. If your East region got 8 teams, your East region got 8 teams. If the Northwest got 4, the Northwest it didn't matter. And by the way, it still didn't change the flights. So, I understand people are frustrated. I get that, but this is the same thing we talk about every year. This is not the first time it's happened. Only once can we think of when flights got shipped out in the opening round, and the next year the budget was so reined in because they overspent so much money across Division III the year before that we got into $1 million budget deficit. It's not going to happen. Yeah. I would love it to happen. Don't get me wrong. I'd love it to happen. But it's just the reality. It would have been a great surprise if it had been approved, and we'll ask Bobbi Morgan here in a few minutes about it.
I think if you had polled the membership at the next conference, are you willing to kick in $5,000 a year for a travel budget for men's and women's basketball? I think that would get voted down pretty soundly. Yeah. You can only get so mad when you can't pay.
Hey, they just upped their dues. They more than doubled up their dues starting this season. Sure. We have more money that we're clearly using, but that doesn't mean that 90% of the nation's going to say, I'll give $5,000 more just to make sure the Northwest can fly a school out of there in case they make the tournament.
So Lynchburg can go fly to Puget Sound for the first round.
Exactly. I'm going to take a break. When we come back, Bobbi Morgan's going to join us. Gordon, I'm not sure if she's going to be able to hear you the way this system is set up. Okay. I haven't figured it out. I mean, we can certainly try if you want to stay on the line and ask her questions. Sure. If she can't hear us or hear you, then maybe you can just relay them to me. But we'll take a break, and when we come back, Bobbi Morgan will join us. You listen to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the WBCA and ABC studios.
College basketball lives in Kansas City at the College Basketball Experience at Sprint Center. The College Basketball Experience is the place to get your game on. It's not a museum, it's an experience you won't forget. Discover the history of the game in the National Collegiate Basketball Hall of Fame, featuring the Gallery of Honor, Mentor's Circle, and Honor Theater. Suit up in the latest CBE logoed Nike gear at the CBE Hoop Shop. Elevate your game today and visit the house that college basketball built.
It starts right when you hit the court. You imagine your finest moment. The game-winning shot that gets you to the dance, a monster dunk or no-look pass, and cutting down the net. Sports lets us dream of our own success and prepare us for our finest moments on and off the court.
I'm a current Division III student athlete, and I remember how intimidating the first year of college can be.
So if you're a first-year student athlete and nervous about coming out as LGBTQ, I pledge to stand by your side as your ally.
If you can play Division III.
We are Division III student athletes, and you can be too. If you can play in Division III.
Defining moments. Championship dreams. Share the experience with your family and friends. The 2017 NCAA Division III Men's Basketball Championship, March 17th and 18th at the Salem Civic Center in Salem, Virginia. Visit ncaa.com/tickets for your tickets today.
Welcome back to, whoops, don't have the audio working. We've done that a few times. There we go. Welcome back to Hoopsville. I'm your host, Dave McHugh. If you got any questions for us, tweet us at D3Hoopsville or hashtag Hoopsville. Email us hoopsville@d3hoops.com or join us on Facebook, facebook.com/Hoopsville. We told you the committee chairs would be joining us on today's show, and we got our first one up. Gordon will be joining us momentarily as soon as I am able to finagle a couple things on the production. But first and foremost, Bobbi Morgan joins us on the City of Salem Hoopsville hotline. Coach, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having us on.
Oh, that's going to be tricky. So hold on a second, Coach. I just realized I have two earpieces, which is probably going to eliminate Gordon because I don't know if I'm going to be able to hear him now myself. But we'll work on it. I got a couple ways to do this. Bear with me, Coach, as I literally flip out one earpiece into another and maybe see if I can ask you a really long question that you can give me a really long answer to. First and foremost, I know the committee did a lot of hard work. I know that you went late into the night. I am a little bit curious, risking that I may not hear the answer, but how late did you guys end up working on this one?
No, it wasn't too bad. I mean, we had some stoppages, obviously, for different reasons. We took a
Apparently,
couple breaks.
I can't hear anything.
You can't hear me?
Hold on, Coach. Oh, because I hit the wrong button. I know you're probably talking. This is what's called, I had everything lined up until I didn't have everything set.
Okay.
This is why I need producers and why we need to do some spending of money in this studio, but that's a whole other conversation. So, Coach, try that again. Now I can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So it wasn't too bad. I mean, it was earlier than other nights. I mean, we got on after obviously there were different rack calls going on throughout the day, and we got together about 2:00. With some of the regions had finished up, and we were able to start looking at the rankings. And we took a couple breaks, and when all was said and done, we were talking about site reps and different things like that. After 11, but it was not that late of a call. But the final bracketing and stuff like that went a little later. But it's all good work.
In the grand scheme of things, what are your thoughts on the work that the committee did?
I mean, it's my third year doing this with the committee, and I think all 3 years they all present different challenges, right? Because, obviously, and this, you guys talked about it all day, you talk about it all the time, the restrictions that we have with travel and geographics, and, it's not the kind of bracket that would be in a perfect world, but under the circumstances and the situation, we think we did as good a job as we could. And, we tried to really keep some, ones and twos meeting each other as we got, into the different rounds and we tried to keep teams away from each other as best we could. But inevitably, you've got some regions where, you've got teams that are pretty familiar with each other, playing each other earlier than we would have liked, but there's just no way to do it without flying teams all over the country.
In about 40 seconds, we may be able to get Gordon to join us the way my system's set up. Hopefully, he'll have some questions. Let me start a little bit with the rankings, if you don't mind. We missed two teams, no big deal. It gets nitty-gritty when it gets down to that point. We're splitting hairs. But we did notice that you moved Calvin ahead of Carnegie Mellon. Gordon certainly made a good argument for it just a short time ago. What was the decision ultimately in that region to do that?
Well, I mean, Carnegie Mellon was ranked 8th in their region. And if you look at their body of work in the last month, it was not strong. And, they had 7 losses. They also only had 1 win. I'm in my car, so I'm doing this from my memory.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
But I recall they only had 1 win against a ranked opponent. And that certainly came into play. Calvin had 5 losses. I think Carnegie, did they have 8 or 7? Correct me. But all of Calvin's losses were to ranked opponents. They had 20 wins. They had done well, later in the year. And, it was a tough, the last conversations, as you know, and we say this every year, and we're talking about teams that could be in the tournament that don't get in every year. And, how do you decide? Because that last grouping that you get to, sometimes they're equally deserving, and you just try to find something that separates teams. And, I know the SOS strength of schedule is a big thing, but, I'm not sure. Forget Carnegie Mellon's record I'm in my car, but how many losses did they have? 8, 9?
8, I believe. Yeah.
8. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah,
8 losses. Yeah.
So, yeah. So, and Calvin had 20 wins. I know their SOS was just a little bit above 500. I think it was like 510 or 515, and but those, their losses were to ranked teams. They had 2 wins against ranked teams, so their body of work was pretty solid.
Yeah, no, and more of just a curiosity. Like I said, Gordon made a pretty good argument. Gordon's actually joining us. I'll see if he can ask you a question. You can hear it. If not, I'm going to try and hit a button and see if you can hear it, and hopefully this works.
Okay.
Go ahead, Gordon.
Hey, Coach, we should have just gotten – I can give you my address. You can drive to my house, and we can do the call from here.
Hold on. Coach, did you hear him?
I can hear him barely, yeah.
Oh, I know why. Let me try one more button. Go ahead, Gordon.
Okay. Coach, the question I was going to ask is if I'm looking at the brackets, I see it looks like Amherst, Tufts, St. Thomas are kind of the top seeds. And then if maybe I'm reading too much in this, it looks like Ohio Northern is in front of Thomas More in the Great Lakes. Is that where they finished in that final regional ranking?
Those are published, and I'm in my car.
Oh, well, then I should know the answer to that.
You should, and I'm driving, so I'm really not in a position to start going through each region and tell you exactly where everybody played. But, and are you asking what? Say that again.
So, I guess how does the committee sort out, Thomas More and Ohio Northern, who flipped back and forth all season long?
Yeah, well, Thomas More stayed up top at the end, so they ended up. That's the one I do remember. They were ahead of Ohio Northern.
Okay.
And obviously, and Amherst was obviously ahead of Tufts because they won the game and finished that ranking. So they were finished as number 1 in their region.
Okay.
Per that, a curiosity, George Fox getting into the tournament. I know that's a kind of a tricky one. They didn't play 3 games against Division III opponents, which kind of takes a hit on their criteria. Was it one of those where you tried to overlook that? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that you try to say, listen, let's see if we can look past that point and find criteria, and they are better in a lot of other ways than the fact that they're 3 games short to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, and I know that issue has happened. And I think that issue has happened in that region more dramatically, if I recall, where a team only was able to play 15 or 16, or had 15 or 16 wins against in-division opponents, if I remember. But George Fox's body, again, we go back to body of work, and I know that sounds like a cliche, but they were, I think they were 18-5. Is that
18-4.
This is pretty good for me in a car.
Yeah, not bad.
But you know what? They had some really good wins. They're playing a tough schedule. If I recall, too, and again, this might be off recollection, I believe their losses were to all ranked opponents or something close to that.
That's correct.
Correct.
And obviously they're a class. We don't do this subjectively. Their history doesn't really matter, but they're a strong program, and we felt that 18-5, and then we took a peek at the secondary, which we do. We take a peek at that all the time, and yeah, they had 3 more wins in that category. It was a pretty solid resume, and we just felt that they were a team that belonged. Out of where that region where they came out, they jumped out and they belonged to be there.
Was there any team that got left at the table or was involved in the conversations, especially late, where you sat that, or teams in plural, that you sat there going, they've got a lot of good criteria, but this is just falling short? That is maybe a lesson to everybody else out there on how to secure their criteria a little bit better.
Well, I mean, when you start to split hairs, right, when you get through all the primary criteria and, everything is so close, whether it's, win-loss, ranked wins, all of the primary criteria, then you start delving in. I mean, you do delve into what does that strength of schedule look like? I mean, who did they beat and what quality are those wins? And did they lose games that they shouldn't have, the quote-unquote bad loss, right? And I think sometimes those things, when you get down to all the other criteria, you can't separate teams. You do start to look at those things. I don't think there's one thing the team should avoid. I mean, I think you want to try to play a strong schedule. Obviously, you want it, but a lot of conferences are limited, and we try not to penalize those folks, particularly, the people out west that can't necessarily get all of their games in division, and you can't necessarily get ranked wins or because you can't play those teams for you're limited geographically. So we try not to penalize them. You certainly don't want to lose games that you shouldn't. I mean, that's pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't lose to a team that's got 2 wins or a team that's, got a below 500 winning percentage, very often. I mean, everybody might have a stinker once in this season, but, if you've got a couple bad losses and, that kind of factors into your body of work.
Go ahead,
Coach. We knew we were going to get this complaint on both the men's and the women's side, and we've tried to kind of explain the realities of the economics of the way this works to folks. It might make them feel better if they hear it from you than from us. Whitman and George Fox and Puget Sound. This will be the third game between Whitman and George Fox in 15 days.
I know.
And, they basically play the Northwestern Conference tournament twice, once for real and then once in the NCAA tournament. We've said that the only way to fix that, your hands are kind of tied financially, just give you the platform to, I think, essentially say what we've said, but so that they can hear it from you as well as from us.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and the committee is made up of who are, we are completely empathetic and understand that that's not the ideal situation, but we are limited to what we can do geographically in Division III, and the NCAA does a great job, and they throw, it's a great tournament, but these are the constraints that we work in, and it's not basketball. It's limited to, it's the Division III philosophy, and it's the budget that we have to work with, and it is a shame. I mean, the ideal situation would be there was a lot more teams out there, and they wouldn't have to be playing the same teams again, but there aren't. And, we understand that. You can't look at it any other way. We can't put Tufts and Whitman in the first round. We can't fly teams all over. It's just not the reality. And we understand the frustration. But I hope people also understand that, the committee, we do try within the limitations that we have to try to make it as best that we can, and that's all we can do.
With that known, you had 2 flights in the first weekend. That's the 2 California schools, and you moved Texas Dallas to be the host so that Hendricks could get there to avoid a flight. My question, though, is it looks very much like you've got 6 flights, very potentially, the second weekend. Was there discussion to try and move anything around so you could bring a flight? And I know it takes 2 flights to fix the Northwest problem. You got to fly one in and fly one out. But was there any conversation of either maybe we can tinker some things in the second weekend to give us the flights in the first weekend? Or was the NCAA going to say no anyway?
You know what? You'd have to ask them that, honestly, because and I mean that. I mean, we looked at it like you're trying to limit the flights right here. And this is what we're looking at. And, as far as this, we talked about the scenarios that, as you're moving people around and looking at, well, what if this happens, then we've got a flight. And if this happens, but that's really, now you're taking something that's difficult to do and adding the idea of like, well, now predict what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Well, this could be a flight. Well, this could not be a flight.
Isn't that what the NCAA does, though? Don't they take your bracket and tear it apart and go, whoa, you're going to have too many flights here?
No, they don't. I mean, obviously we are given the challenge of trying to make these things work, and again, we did the best that we could. And the second weekend, I mean, some of them line up pretty well, and if there's an outlier, there's some we looked at that. Well, if that happens, we could have an issue. But come on, we've got 60. We got to have these games. We can't not play them. So, but again, I mean, and I mean this. I think it's a great tournament, and I think, it's not perfect in that, we aren't able to see, each region and then have 1 through 16 like the Division I tournament and all that. But I think it still is going to be exciting. I think we've got great teams in all 4 corners that could really, we could have a fantastic Final Four. And I think there's a little, and I might be wrong, but I think there's more parity. I think there's a potential for some other teams to kind of come to the forefront this year. So, we'll see.
I agree with you. Gordon, do you have another question? We were doing a nice alternating, but I didn't know if you had another question.
Yeah, so you have Tufts and Amherst on opposite sides of the bracket, and that certainly looks intentional and makes sense. Were there other sorts of things where you said, let's try and keep understanding the geographic and the financial limitations? Were there those types of things where you said, let's try and keep these two teams, separated from each other if we can?
Well, I mean, there's more to it than just two teams. I mean, we kind of tried to look at each pod in and of itself at first, right?
Okay.
And then when you get them all together, you certainly don't want, we didn't want Thomas More playing St. Thomas, those kinds of things. So, yeah, there's a lot of intentionality to it, but, there's also some of it, you end up with a situation, a scenario that you don't always want, but you're like, well, we can't really do much about that just because, again, typically because of travel. Like you might have some teams from the Midwest playing each other a little sooner than we would have liked, but there's not much we could do about it because there's just the resources aren't there.
One game that jumps out at me, Gustavus Adolphus versus DePaul, will be the first time those two teams have ever played each other, according to a tweet I just saw from one of those squads. That does feel like a bit of a doozy of a game, but as you said, sometimes it's unavoidable. At least you got it at Oshkosh. Did Geographics kind of play a role there? It almost feels like you didn't have enough teams maybe out in that general area to be able to do some more creative things.
Well, again, I feel like the brackets, maybe it was last year, it might have been my first year, where it was a little bit more like left-right, in terms of this country,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there were some different teams in this year that, we did have some unique challenges. Obviously, you already mentioned Hendricks and some of those things that happened. So that game in particular, I mean, obviously geographically it works. And, when we hover that 500 miles, right, that's you have to find those games that are going to fit.
When you looked at how everything kind of played out, I mean, how hard how many brackets did you basically have? Was this a little bit more straightforward? And on top of that, how many people were involved? I know you had said to me previously that, full 8 people would be involved, even if you had to have some extra people, but you have a few people on your committee that are in this tournament. Jim Scheibel at Rochester.
So obviously Chris and Jim and Karen had to jump off for bracketing, and Jim actually had to drop off when his team was discussed.
Yeah.
And so, Tara Ruck actually jumped on for the East. And so, it was fine. I mean, we had a lot of eyes on this, and, the nice part about the committee is that, we lean on the committee members from each region to really look at their regions and obviously the geographic matchups and the things that are going to work. And, we had some suggestions that we took and that we couldn't do or chose not to do. We discussed at length, and you talk about how many brackets. I mean, the bracket starts one way and then it's like it's a puzzle, right? It gets moved around and you look at it and you say, wait a minute, we can't do that. That's not going to work. And, you catch things too. I mean, you catch things. Well, we can't have them playing them. And, those kinds of discussions go on. So there was quite a lot of input, really. It was the group effort, and it was good. I mean, there's some really good people on our committee that are, there's, like I said this to you, I think off the record, there's no agendas. I think that people are really trying to get this to be a good tournament. And, there's tough, it's funny when people say to me, though, well, that's a tough first round game. I mean, you're in the NCAA tournament. There should be tough first round games. Like, if they're not tough first round games, then we aren't picking the right teams, And, granted, there's some, AQs that are weaker and from weaker regions, but I mean, they should be tough first round games and they should be tough second round games.
And I think I said it on the broadcast to the NCAA that were tough, and I was hinting at that there's a difference, and I didn't say it there, but I said at the beginning of the show, there's a difference in the level of Division III, the women's basketball. There's an upper tier, and that tier has gotten deeper, which is wonderful to see. But then there's a line, and then there's everybody else. So there's a lot of those first round games. You're like, oh, that's going to be tough for X or tough for Y because they're going to be playing one of the top teams in the country. But as you said, they've got to play them. So those games need to be played, and you are in the tournament. It doesn't mean you get an easy game. That's not how this is supposed to work.
Right,
And so I know that was a common theme with what I was saying, but that was the point, was that this is tough. You kind of hinted at it. The last few years, I feel like this bracket has gotten more and more diversified.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. I think, is Rose Holman first timer? I think they're a first timer.
Yep, they are.
Yeah, and and I guess the way I look at it, and again, I'm more familiar with the Mid-Atlantic, but we've had a year, I guess 2 years ago, in fact, when my team was in, it was pretty top heavy. Scranton was really strong, and but there wasn't this parity that we have, and I felt, again, there were a few regions this year that were not as necessarily as strong, but there was more parity. There was some regions where, I mean, geez, there's a lot of good teams, and the Mid-Atlantic certainly was one of them. And obviously there were some good teams throughout the country where it was tough. You got two undefeated teams head to head, Thomas More, right? You've got two undefeated teams in the same region. You've had, it was just, I think there's some sleepers out there. And I know that the traditional powers are always going to be good. They're hosting, they're going to, they're seasoned, but I think that there's some teams out there that can pick people off this year. I really do.
When you and the committee finally finished and got it all done and reevaluated it this morning, was there anything in hindsight that you didn't solve that you had been trying to solve? I know the travel thing outside of that. I mean, outside of I really like to get three teams or one team out of this Northwest kerfuffle. But, just something that challenged you guys that you just couldn't find a decent resolution to.
No, I mean, there probably are, but, at the end of the day, you get this time constraint to get this bracket together. And, I think if you had a week to do it, you probably could, it's like anything else, right? But I think it was good. I mean, we did have a final back and forth this morning about a few issues, but they were kind of minor and, and more somewhat philosophical as opposed to, this doesn't work. This was one, there were some different opinions, I guess, and that's more confidential information. But for the most part, I think it came out pretty good. And again, the West is tough. It's tough, and there's just, those are the only teams that are out there. They have to play each other, and we understand how frustrating that can be, but we do the best we can.
What was it? There was something I just had, and I've lost it. It had to do with yours. Oh, I had a lot more games on Sunday. I know you and I have chatted about the challenges of that. And speaking of, less time to do things, I think Sunday kind of went chalk. I don't remember. Gordon can correct me because Sundays I can't. It's still a blur. I don't think I lived through Sunday. But I don't think you had a lot of upsets on Sunday. But did Sunday present any challenges, or did this year kind of go well enough for you?
Well, I mean, we have to get into that score reporting system and do the what if scenarios and ask the racks to look at, if this happens, you need to vote this way. We have to do that. So I think in and of itself, it creates extra work for the committee. And I think in a perfect world, we would wrap these games up on Saturday and then, allow a little bit more time to get this process completed, in a more maybe humane fashion. I don't know.
Humane, okay.
I mean, just in a more, it gives a little bit more time. But no, there really weren't any problems. I mean, again, there's a buzz to Selection Sunday, and for the committee members, I mean, you work, you lead up to it, you work hard for, weeks leading up to it, looking at these teams and trying to follow what's going on in your region. And it's kind of like game day, right? You get there and you get that final ranking, and hopefully you've done your work pretty well each week leading up to it, so it's your job is easier. And again, there's a couple upsets that threw some wrinkles into it, but for the most part, I thought it went well, and we got each region knocked out as quickly as we could. We were texting each other, we're following the scores. Somebody's got D3 Hoops on, checking the updates, right? So there's a plug, it got done. And I think that the committee felt good about it.
Coach, I have one last question for you. You were also the top seed in your own tournament in the Centennial, and you were hosting the championship game there Saturday afternoon. How do you handle the division of labor? How do you committee chair, head coach, hosting a tournament? How did you manage that? Time management skills.
Yeah, well, I'm about ready to take a nap, but
Okay.
I can tell you that because we were hosting, I couldn't fly out, and typically the chair will go out to Indy, but I was like, I can't book a flight because I don't even know if we're playing Saturday, and truthfully, we didn't see that coming. I mean, we kind of had a unexpectedly, a strong a little bit sooner than we thought. Our team did really well, and at our conference it was so tight that we were fortunate to host. So, I mean, it's like anything else. I mean, I have 3 kids. You just keep working. You just, you just find another hour somewhere in the day to do committee stuff, and you find another hour to drive them to practice, whatever. So you just do it. But it's tough. I mean, but almost all of the committee members are coaches. We have an athletic director. We do have a sports communication guy, but they all have incredibly demanding jobs. So, I think anybody who serves on an NCAA committee is, you're doing it because you're passionate about, trying your sport and you really want to be a part of the process. So, you just do it. And you find a way.
Yeah, I know that feeling, but you guys certainly do more work. I know it was a tough loss in the semifinals, especially being at home. Kind of brought the season to a thud a little bit, but as you hinted, you thought this would be next year. How do you think the season ended for you guys, and what are you looking forward to?
I mean, you know what? I tell you what, it was a great game. It was back and forth. It was like one of those, and so many of our games this year were like decided at the final minute, or two. So we won a lot of really close games, and in this particular game, it was such a great atmosphere. I mean, we had a great crowd. It was packed, and we did the little things that we didn't do the little things, I guess. We missed some free throws, 6 free throws down the stretch. We had some uncharacteristic turnovers, and I almost think that the moment kind of was a little bit too big, and we kind of got a little nervous. And Gettysburg made a few shots at the end, and we lost by 4. And it's a team that we split with during the year, but we split with them very close. So at least in our home game, and they smoked us actually up at their place. So, was it devastating? Absolutely not. I mean, it was one of those years where, like, we had a blast, and would have loved to have been playing for the finals. Would love to be in this tournament. That would add more work, right? But but you know what? I mean, you walk away going, hey, we had a really successful season. Kids are great. We only lose one. I lose one senior who was healthy. Another senior was injured for most of the year. So we have our entire team back, and so I'm hoping it'll be a great experience for them to kind of, hey, they watched that championship game on our home court Saturday. They sat there and watched it, and so I don't think that felt really good. but I think they'll learn from the experience and be better for next year. So, but we had fun. So we're not drowning in our sorrows here. We're fine.
Well, I can understand that. Congratulations on the good season. I appreciate you coming on and chatting with us, especially on a busy day. I know it's a busy day, though we do always give the guest the final word. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with those who may be tuning in? And I assure you there's many tuned in.
Well, you know what? No, I mean, I think that you guys do a fantastic job for Division III, and it's great. And we all hope that it's an outstanding tournament. And that it's a great experience for all the kids that are in, and for those teams that don't get in, and there's a lot, there's a lot. It's just every year is different, so it's tough, and I hope everybody knows that the committee really makes a great effort in trying to make this as good as we can.
Well, thank you so much. I know you'll enjoy the tournament and as the chair, and you'll be at Grand Rapids. Thanks for taking the time. I'll quite sure we'll talk more often, a little more off the air, but enjoy it, and good luck on the next 3 weeks here.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
You too. Bobbi Morgan joining us here. Chair of the Division III Women's National Committee and head coach of the Haverford women's basketball program. They lost in the semifinals, but as Coach said, gave her a chance to get a little bit more work done maybe on the committee side of things. Gordon, before we let you go, any final thoughts on what she had to say and the women's side of this bracket?
No, I like Coach Morgan in this role. She's she's a straight shooter. She gets the Northwest Conference thing. I think we sort of have we have a good sense for what they go through, the way the teams are stacked up in the Central and in the western part of the country. And again, I think they've put together a good bracket. They've got undefeated teams kind of anchoring, and the one bracket that doesn't have an undefeated team has Tufts, who is separated from an undefeated team by 4 points. I think it's a good bracket. I think with the restrictions they have, they've done a good job.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is what it is. I mean, would we love a perfect bracket? Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah.
And we can nitpick.
So Santa Cruz could fly to Amherst because that would be the 64 versus 1.
There you go. I mean, in a perfect world, yeah, there's a lot of things we'd love to do, and we can nitpick with the best of them. We've seen enough brackets out there to be able to nitpick, and doesn't mean we're dead right. It doesn't mean the committee's wrong. It just means we can find things to talk about. Trust me, as Gordon would tell you, these brackets have come a long way.
Yeah.
We used to have a lot more problems with brackets than we do now if we're nitpicking over these kinds of things. Well, Gordon, I know you need to go. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Any final thoughts for those out there, or are you good?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. Thanks so much to Gordon joining us on the City of Salem Skype hotline. Appreciate him taking the time. Going to answer a couple quick questions, and then we're going to go to Kevin Vande Streek. We're going to talk to him as well. One person pointed out, say, if the tournament wanted to save money, they would have put Lewis and Clark in the Northwest bracket over Santa Cruz. Yeah, you can't do that, unfortunately. Santa Cruz earned its way into the tournament as a Pool B bid, plain and simple. And by the way, you never know. Santa Cruz might surprise some people. You just never know. So that is what it is. I'm sorry to say. I know we got some other questions, so let me see if I can quickly get to them. Let's see. Do you like Wheaton's chances to win a game or two this year? They've underperformed the last 2 years in the tournament, but this is maybe their best team. Lots of experience, a couple of 6'2" girls in the middle that they have coming on. Actually, I'm a little worried. I think the game against Rose-Hulman might be a bit of a challenge, to be blunt. I think Rose-Hulman's got a legitimate chance, and then they've got Wash U or St. Norbert, most likely Wash U ahead of them. Nothing against Wheaton, but if they come out of the first weekend, it's going to be the story. It probably will be the story of the opening weekend. Nothing against Wheaton. I know they're improved. They just haven't blown me away. Rose-Hulman, I think, gives them a game, but then they're playing Wash U. If they beat Wash U, trust me, we're going to be talking about them. That would be one of the more outstanding results and a big upset in the tournament. The committee will be vindicated. Thank you for your hard work this weekend, especially. Appleton Rocks, thank you, sir, for giving us a call. Susquehanna caught a break in hosting with CNU and Scranton, but both unable to host. What do you think is SU's chances of hosting into next weekend? None. Susquehanna's done. SU only caught the break because Scranton, and you're right, you could argue. I think Susquehanna looks like they were not hosting because of CNU and Scranton, if that makes any sense. I'm going to my bracket to confirm what I want to say here. I think they were going to host anyway. I don't think they're hosting because CNU and Scranton didn't. It's a valid argument. But the thing is, with CNU's and Scranton's brackets, those are basically brackets that have just been moved to other locations. So I don't see brackets that have been changed, if that makes any sense. I don't see how it trickled down. I think Susquehanna's hosting because they needed another host in the region, and Susquehanna got it. But I don't think there's any chance they host movement. Well, I shouldn't say that. I really shouldn't say that. The trick's going to be Scranton men will have priority, so they probably will host the next weekend if they get through. I don't know how they'll shape up with Oswego, and I don't know about Williams. Well, what am I saying? Middlebury's in this pod, so Susquehanna, I need to look up. If Susquehanna's going to host, they need Middlebury to get knocked off and maybe even Newman. Definitely Middlebury, though. So I don't see it happening. And if you feel like diving into it, do you see the Landmark as an up-and-coming conference in D3 world with a new coach at Moravian having early success? E-Town will be hiring a new coach. Goucher has a new coach at the helm as well. Here's what I'll say about the Landmark, and I've said this a lot. They already should be there. This Landmark's been around for 10 years, and it's underperformed. Yes, Catholic has been good. Yes, Scranton has had its signs. Susquehanna has emerged. It's wonderful. But nothing against Susquehanna, and I know who this is coming from, so I'm being gentle at least. Susquehanna should have walked away with a Landmark this year. That being said, Scranton came on really nicely at the end. The Landmark can get more competitive, and I think it will be more competitive, but it should have been more competitive 5 years ago. I'm hopeful that the Landmark can be a little bit more up and coming. I think it's a good conference. It's definitely top half of D3, but I'm waiting. I've been waiting. Who do you see coming out of these two pods? Worcester fan and a North Central grad. My heart is with North Central. Money on the Scots. I think people are underappreciating Hanover. Let's just put it that way. I think people are misunderstanding Hanover. All right, going to get going here. Going to take another break. When we come back, Kevin Vande Streek will join us on the air. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the WBCA and ABC studios. More Hoopsville after this.
College basketball lives in Kansas City at the College Basketball Experience at Sprint Center. The College Basketball Experience is the place to get your game on. It's not a museum, it's an experience you won't forget. Discover the history of the game in the National Collegiate Basketball Hall of Fame, featuring the Gallery of Honor, Mentor Circle, and Honor Theater. Suit up in the latest CBE logoed Nike gear at the CBE Hoop Shop. Elevate your game today and visit the house that college basketball built.
It starts right when you hit the court. You imagine your finest moment. The game-winning shot that gets you to the dance. A monster dunk or no-look pass, and cutting down the net. Sports lets us dream of our own success and prepare us for our finest moments on and off the court.
I'm a current Division III student athlete, and I remember how intimidating the first year of college can be.
So if you're a first-year student athlete and nervous about coming out as LGBTQ, I pledge to stand by your side as your ally.
If you can play Division III.
We are Division III student athletes, and you can be too. If you can play in Division III.
Defining moments. Championship dreams. Share the experience with your family and friends. The 2017 NCAA Division III Men's Basketball Championship, March 17th and 18th at the Salem Civic Center in Salem, Virginia. Visit ncaa.com/tickets for your tickets today.
Welcome back to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the WBCA and ABC studios. I'm your host, Dave McHugh. Probably about a half hour or so left in this special broadcast, so if you got questions, we'll try and answer them. We do have Men's Basketball Committee Chair Kevin Vande Streek on the show here. Do got a question, thoughts on Northwestern St. Paul? As I have said before, don't sleep on them. They have proven in the past that they can beat a tough team. Whitewater better not overlook them. I mean, they knocked off St. Thomas a couple years ago, and they've not nearly knocked off other teams. They got all the way to the Sweet 16 that year. They knocked off St. Thomas. So, don't sleep on them. Just because they're unheralded doesn't mean they're not good. So keep that in mind. If you got questions, email us hoopsville at d3hoops.com. Tweet us at d3hoopsville or hashtag Hoopsville. You can also join us on any of the chat rooms we're trying to run. I know we got one on the on YouTube. We got one particular fan who just loves to bury us with 3-word questions. And we're certainly trying to follow those questions there when you get the chance. So let's talk men's basketball. Talk about the Men's Basketball Committee Chair. Bobbi Morgan was nice enough to come on a moment ago to talk to us about her team, or the women's side. We've got the men's side ahead of us. The men certainly made some interesting decisions and even bucked a rather significant trend in doing so. What does it all mean, though, is probably the million-dollar question. Joining us on the Hoopsville Hotline, presented by the City of Salem, is the head coach of the Calvin men's basketball team, Kevin Vande Streek. Coach, welcome back, sir. And have you caught any sleep yet?
Well, thanks for having me. No, I actually just said to our guys, we did some fast break drills and shooting today, and I said, I don't have enough energy to run a good practice today, so we're not doing it.
Well, let's be honest. You're practicing. You guys, I don't think many people gave you a chance to be in the tournament.
Well, no, and we're feel very blessed and fortunate and happy and all those kind of things to be playing. The guys are really excited. I think we played our best basketball down the stretch, and we're looking forward to a little more.
Somebody pointed out, you guys, no pressure, have won the first round game each of the last 6 times you've been in the NCAA tournament. So I'm just letting you know, 7's a lucky number. You're going to have to keep that up.
I'm not sure we played the number 3 team in the country in any of those games, so we'll see how this goes.
I was gonna say when you looked at what, how much actually? Let me get there before we get to my question. How much were you involved with the bracketing, being that you were you're in as a member?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, pretty much all of it.
Okay.
We obviously geography and all those things come into play like they would any other time, including with us, with Calvin College. And when it looked like we were going to Marietta, I thought maybe someone else in the pod should be playing Marietta instead of us. And then I thought, you know what, I'm not taking any chances. I want to make sure that no one thinks that we're getting a break here when we shouldn't be. And so we just want to do what's right. And the committee's been great, and it's had a lot of integrity, and we're trying to get the best teams in and doing the right thing for Division III, and Calvin College is no exception.
Won the obviously beat Hope, which, by the way, beat them the last 2 times you faced them. That'll please your fan base to no end. But obviously you weren't. I know it's hard when your team's involved to be involved in the bracketing. I assume you kind of kept your hands off when they decided to move you, and that's why you're playing the 3rd team in the country?
Well, yeah, in my first year on the committee we were in, and then I stepped off the call altogether. Then the next year I was in, and Calvin was in, and I talked to Jeff Burns. I said, Jeff, it's possible that someday I'm going to have to be in charge of this thing. I got to hear what's going on and how you guys are doing this kind of thing. And and look, the people that we're with, they're going to make sure that there's nothing that goes below what should be happening from an integrity standpoint. And we got lots of people looking at it and checking through. So I sure hope no one would think we'd pulled any funny thing here. At least no one in their right mind would play Marietta first. So
yeah. Hey, so welcome to the tournament, and you're playing Marietta. I know you're the chair. Please cheat us nicely. And that might have been Elisa just saying, you know what, I'm giving you Marietta. That's what my one joy of the weekend is going to be. So let's talk about selections then and move into that direction. I think the elephant in the room is the fact that the big trend was bucked. I know when we were doing selections last night, it was hard to ignore Oshkosh. And when the other guys saw, because we were able to kind of figure out what the rankings were probably going to be, when we saw that Oshkosh had gotten moved ahead of Illinois Wesleyan and had gotten moved ahead of Eau Claire into a position that they were definitely going to be at the table, their thinking was, there's no way the committee's doing that if they're not thinking about picking them. And while I agreed with them, my thinking was the trend has been, and what we've been told, is no team below 667. What was it about Oshkosh that blew all of that out of the water?
Right. Well, I think, it starts back, probably starts back 5 years ago, in all honesty. But it starts with you and I have had conversations, and I can't remember which was on the air or off the air, but we had talked about this year's field not having quite the numbers that maybe they have had in recent years, both from strength of schedule and from win-losses, and that it was possible we were looking at a team with maybe 8 or 9 losses and a team with maybe a 510 or 500 or, heaven forbid, below that getting into the tournament, and I think when I say it started 5 years ago, when my friend Brian Van Haften, who was the chair last year, first year on the committee, and he and I have been friends for 40 years, he said to me, Kevin, I'm going to tell you right now, you got to find the best teams in your region, and you got to go play them. And I'm like, you're crazy. I'm not going to do that. And he goes, no, I'm serious. You have to beat good teams in order to get an at-large bid. And I believe that has been the case as we have selected at-large teams since then. So moving this forward to Oshkosh, we went through our at-large. We went through 10 pretty quickly, and then you start getting a little slower, and now you're looking at some teams and you're saying, how do we pick the best teams of this group and what separates them. And in Oshkosh's case, they had by far the most best wins. If that's probably not grammatically correct, but that's the case. By far the most best wins. And so that would also follow suit with Augustana and St. Thomas. Now, Oshkosh happened to have a higher strength of schedule, but we've also talked about how those numbers are just a place to start, and we need to dig in deeper and find out what those mean. And so even though Oshkosh had 10 losses, I believe they had eight really high-quality wins. And just on a side note, I know we don't use this Massey rating or anything on the committee or anything, but it's something I have fiddled around with a long time and looked at today, and they have them. I believe it's the number 9 team in the country is Oshkosh. So I don't think we missed on them. I just think it is a trend that was bucked, like you said, and maybe surprised some people.
So let me flip that the other direction, though. You brought a team also in St. Thomas, whose SOS was about a 530. They were 19-7, 19 and 7. Mm-hmm. While a team of 20-5 with a similar SOS in Mount St. Joseph remained at the table. It almost feels like, okay, quality wins and SOS. I get it. I understand the argument. I'll get back to my thought on that in a minute. But if we're going to do that, then why is a team with one less loss and two more losses and one less win getting in over a team like Mount St. Joseph, who's got more wins? And we can argue on the quality wins. I think they were both pretty equal in that category. It seems like we had two different arguments there.
Well, I would disagree with that and say we had the same argument, and that is when we looked at quality wins and the things that we used to measure quality wins, St. Thomas actually had about 3 times the number of quality wins of St. Joe. And St. Joe, and we're talking, these are close now, right?
Yeah.
These were
we're
talking
the
last 3 or 4 in, the last 2 or 3 out. St. Joe was right there, one of the last ones to not get in. But that was the determining factor. The same rationale that we used for Oshkosh, we used for St. Thomas, applied to St. Joe, to Illinois Wesleyan, and so on.
The fact there was scuttlebutt. I don't have anywhere I can point to, but there was scuttlebutt that there was concern that because Illinois Wesleyan hadn't made its tournament, that maybe they shouldn't even be in this conversation. It appears that you as a national committee didn't agree with that assertion.
Well, again, trying to use that same thought process, they had a lot of good wins. But I think, in all honesty, we would have had a hard time choosing them over teams that did make their conference tournaments, and even specifically in their own league, that you say, boy, how do you differentiate with that and to put them over the hump? We just didn't quite see it.
Are you saying because they didn't make the tournament, which is not technically criteria, or just because being in the tournament was giving the other teams more data to differentiate themselves?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
Well, I'm saying instead of saying to Illinois Wesleyan, I don't know if we can enter the equation here because they didn't make the tournament, and because they didn't make the tournament is not a criteria part, versus the other teams who did make tournaments. It's not a conversation of made tournament, not made tournament, because that's not criteria.
Right.
Or is it because those other teams made tournaments and data was then they got more data, they got more wins or losses and SOS. Right. Is that where because the data stood out, or because you actually made a conscious decision to say something that's not technically in the criteria?
No, that's correct. There'd be more data, more room. They played, teams in their conference tournaments had a chance to play, again, more better teams to get more better wins, and Illinois Wesleyan just fell short of that.
When you go back to Oshkosh, the worry I have, though, with the precedent, and again, I understand the argument, and we had it last night. The thing was staring us was the 6:30, and I eventually shut it down because I said we got to go with what we know, and we know that trend won't happen. Okay, so now the trend happens, but here's my concern. We talk a lot about going out there and challenge yourself. Sure, develop a good SOS. I'm not opposed to that. But there's always been a conversation, whether it be yourself or others, who've also said, that's all well and good, but you also have to win your games. And I understand they got wins over quality teams, but they also had 10 losses. They also only won 63% of the games. They didn't even win 2/3 of their games. Is it a dangerous precedent to say, hey, go challenge yourself, get a couple good wins to boost it? And obviously it's more than a couple. I don't mean to be derogatory there. Get good wins. Don't worry about the losses.
Well, I think, again, I would just get back to the tenet of saying you have to beat good teams. And that's been the case as long as I've been a part of the committee and before. So I do think, the 10 is a round number and it jumps out at people. I think if they were probably 18-9, we wouldn't, no one would even say anything probably. So we got to get past, to me, a number that says, boy, you have to have an SOS of this number or a win number of this, and try to figure out, especially when we're getting towards the end, and say, who do we feel would be the best team here? And it might. I'm not, I guess we'll look a couple years down the road and say, boy, that committee really messed up. Or maybe we say that was a good thing. And I think all along, though, we have been encouraged to go out and find good people to beat, and we've had it the last couple of years with teams like Penn State Barron or Lancaster Bible, and they're hurt a little bit by their conference, as far as how many games they play and not being able to get it. But whenever they have contacted national committee members, we have said you have to play better teams, you have to beat better teams.
I get that, and I totally get that. I just worry that, okay, they're beating tough teams, but they're also losing. You know what I mean? It almost feels like a D1 argument, that we talk. Sometimes I roll my eyes when I see, a team like Syracuse is being discussed as being a bubble team with a 15-12 record or something. And their argument is, well, they play in the ACC, they play a lot of good games. Well, I get that, but they're not winning a super majority. They're barely winning a majority. Does that truly qualify? I just worry that, I'm totally for a stronger schedule and rewarding teams for stronger schedules. Absolutely, to a point. There's also got to be a point of going, but come on, guys. You also didn't win everything. You lost 10 of your 27 games. I just worry about it. I'm not sure what the right answer is. I'm just being the devil's advocate to some degree, because this is obviously the biggest decision this committee has made in a few years.
Yeah, I don't disagree that's probably the true, but I also think, like I said, this year I think is a little bit different in that the teams, at least a lot of teams that I've seen, and maybe teams around the country looking at numbers, it's a little different year than we've had in the past to a certain degree, and I guess we'll find out.
Talking to Kevin Vande Streek, head coach at Calvin, but the men's basketball committee chair. We can go around in circles, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this when we're together in Salem. I think it's going to take some time to process. Of course, you hope Oshkosh maybe goes out there and wins, but that's a whole other conversation. The other thing I'm a little bit curious about is it feels like the SOS is once again emerging as a very important number. How difficult is it to keep that? I mean, the NESCAC got 5 in, thanks in part to some strong SOS numbers. We talk about Oshkosh getting in with a strong SOS. The UAA certainly got some advantages getting in with some strong SOS numbers. How much is that being kept in control, and how much are we worried it may be going too far, if that makes any sense? I mean, can it go too far?
Well, I think, again, the numbers, whether it's wins, somebody's 25-2, or whether somebody has a 590 SOS, that draws your attention. And so that's a really good place to start. And then we're going to try to drill in as deep as we can to figure out what those numbers mean. And, we've used these terms before. Sometimes people have a fake SOS, what I would consider a fake SOS, in that they're getting rewarded for playing good teams and not beating them. But there's also fake win-loss percents. So teams might have 24 wins, and really 1 or 2 have been what we consider quality wins. So it could be a fake win-loss percent, right? So those numbers just kind of get you started, and you got to drill in deep to figure out what those numbers mean.
How much are you guys how long was it taking to get these last? Obviously, there were 2 more picks, so it took longer in general for the men's committee than it has in the past. But how long was it taking? I know we kind of started bogging down around pick number 12. How long did it take you guys to really come up with this?
Well, the first 10 were pretty quick. To be honest, those. We talked through them. We looked at the whole group and said those are pretty clear. And then, the next 3 or 4 took a little bit longer, and the last, 4, 5, 6, took a pretty long time.
When you look at the trend that has gone here, are you worried that there's going to be any, kind of feedback, flashback, whatever it is next year, and maybe everyone sees this and goes out and schedules hard, but then maybe the committee goes, maybe we went too far and we go back the other direction? How conscious are you guys at trying to be consistent from year to year while also at adjusting?
Yeah, I think we have tried very hard, and I understand that you're disagreeing with me, however, very politely. But I think we have tried to stay consistent in that we're really trying to get the best teams. We're not trying to say, hey, the 64 best SOS teams get in, or the 64 teams who won the most games get in. We've tried to figure out who the best teams are, and specifically the 21 at-larges, right, after the 43 AQs, and to say, who are those best teams? What does best mean, and how do we determine what best means? And I think the thought process has been very consistent, but this year we happened to get one of those that had 10 losses.
NESCAC getting 5 in, how much was that a conscious thing on your guys' mind that this was probably going to be a new thing too, that a conference getting 5 teams in the tournament? Counting 1 isn't automatic, obviously, 4 at large. Was going to be something that was a little bit new for everybody, and how much, I don't want to say they didn't deserve it. That's certainly not what I'm trying to say here, but how much did you want to make sure they deserved it?
Well, we didn't necessarily look specifically at that conference or any other conference. There was a time I looked down on I have a page of notes in a Excel document on each one that I'm taking as we go along, and some that I've prepared going in, and all of a sudden I thought, goodness sake, how many Northeast teams are we going to have here? And I looked down, and there was a boatload of them, and I think that was the first time, and after that we still took more. So again, I don't think we were looking at geography or conference or any of those kind of things. Just again, I hate to say it, sound redundant, but just get back to who are the best.
How much did, it seems like SOS numbers in general were higher this year. The UAA certainly was spiked. We're used to the NESCAC having some high numbers, but it seemed like there were more high numbers this year. We talked about the Oshkosh here certainly having a really high number. How much did it seem like SOS numbers were a little bit higher than you were used to?
Well, that's a good question, Dave. I don't know that we really ever talked about comparatively with other years. I think we were pretty focused on, the primary criteria, and of course, I think things start with win-loss and strength of schedule numbers, and then we go from there. But I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what they've compared to past years. We really didn't look at that.
So teams here, my only other thought on this, and this is one of those questions I think we ask all the time, and I think it's tricky. We had the Lancaster Bible scenario last year. I think Mount St. Joseph and Laterno are examples of it this year. And I think we could certainly point to some others. Denison's another great example of teams who don't have great SOS numbers, some below 500, some above 500, but have pretty decent win-losses, especially over 20 wins. What do you say to programs like that who feel like, especially a Laterno, who feel like they're in almost a no-win situation? Maybe they're trying to improve their SOS, maybe they can't improve their SOS, but they're at least still out there winning the games. I mean, how do we justify that to them and I'm not trying to compare to Oshkosh. I'm literally trying to just compare to win-loss numbers is what I'm trying to drive at.
Yeah, I think their Division III has some very unique challenges for sure. We, for example, just using Calvin as an example, we're in a situation we can't go north, can't go east, can't go west. We're really limited in who we can schedule out of conference. Some conferences have 20 or 22 games. We had it one year. In fact, we scheduled Manchester and Anderson 2 years in advance. When we scheduled them the year they were both in the NCAA tournament, and by the time we played them, both teams had undergone coaching changes and were in rebuilding mode, and it hurt our strength of schedule. And so there are a lot of those factors that come into play, and I understand it. I do think there are kind of three levels or three chances, so to speak, of getting in the tournament, and the first is your regular season. You have to schedule the best teams that you can, and you got to win them. If you don't do that, your next chance is the conference tournament, and everyone but the UAA has it, and it's all on you. When I look at our guys, every year, the first practice of the conference tournament following the regular season, I write on the board, the NCAA tournament starts today, in that I expect to not be playing after we lose, at whenever that is. And so everyone has a chance to do that. And so if you don't, you got to look in the mirror a little bit and say, boy, we should have been a little better, maybe. And so then the third level is, of course, to the committee. And now you're put in the hands of 8 people. And I think they're very qualified. I think they have a high integrity and character and work extremely hard in this month to do the best that we can. But the short answer would be schedule better people. I guess that's that's what we have tried to do. It hasn't always worked out for us, but that would be my recommendation to anyone.
I hear what you're saying, and I get it. I just feel like this Oshkosh example is throwing a big monkey wrench into it because you say, we should have won more. Well, they lost double-digit games. 10 games out of 27, 630, they lost a lot of games. And then we got teams like, and I don't want to use Denison because I think Denison could certainly maybe find a way to fix that schedule a little bit. But, we got a Laterno who's doing everything they can in an isolated region. They're 20-5 with a 505 SOS. Whether they deserve to get in or not is not my argument here. It's just that, they at least went out there and won their games. They won 3 more games and lost 5 less. I just think that's where this argument gets weird, and I didn't expect to be in this topic as much as we are. My brain's kind of spinning a little bit, and I'm trying to catch up a little bit, I guess.
Right. Well, and I think you're dwelling on the losses more than the wins. And I would say in my time on the committee in all 4 years, we have focused more on the wins by far than the losses. Who have you beaten? Who are your quality wins? Who's your best win? All of those types of things when trying to decipher between teams. And I wouldn't say we've ignored the losses, but they've been much further down the scale than the wins.
I certainly can. I mean, that's great insight, and that's great for those at home who maybe need to hear that you certainly look at the wins. I think we may, and that maybe we've gone too far. That's just my opinion. I'm not telling you, Kevin, anything here that needs to be changed. I'm just saying maybe we've gone too far if we're ignoring the wins to the point that a 10-loss team walked in the door. Because I also have heard from the committee many occasions, you got to win your games, which I've always took as you can't have dumb losses. But I digress. We could go in circles on this. I know we could.
Well, and I think it's a fair point, Dave. I think you're making a fair argument. I have no problem with it. I would support our decision, and I think it was a unanimous decision there, and that's
okay.
that was our point.
Curiosity, who are the last couple teams in? If you're willing to give it.
Sure. The last couple, probably St. Lawrence and Cabrini.
Really? So Oshkosh was kind of picked earlier on. That meant Illinois Wesleyan got to the table.
One actually.
Okay. So Illinois Wesleyan was at the table for a couple conversations then.
Yes. Yes, they were.
And that also means, was it Bethel in the West got to the table?
Mount St. Joe was probably another one. Loris. Those are teams that Bethel was an AQ.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. I'm confusing with women. I apologize.
So, yeah, Illinois Wesleyan, Mount St. Joe, Loris. I'm trying to think. There was someone else, but those are the ones that were kind of at the table. Turno, yep, that were being talked about.
Okay. When you guys got down to bracketing, what were some of your biggest challenges? I noticed it seems the NCAA was willing to give you or embrace an extra flight to help you out, make that Texas pod maybe a little bit better.
Yeah, we really needed another team from Texas.
Yeah.
In all honesty, but I don't know that we had any more challenges than any other year. It's always the geography just really comes into play. We try to find who we think are probably the best 16 teams and try to keep them apart and get hosts. And I would say one probably interesting thing this year was Christopher Newport and Scranton. I were kind of thinking they were going to be hosting. I kind of thought that Wash U and Tufts, you kind of knew going in the women were going to take those sites, but I wasn't expecting Christopher Newport and Scranton, and so therefore we did a little scrambling late with those guys.
When you kind of looked at it further down, I see a couple interesting things. There's a potential if you get it. It's interesting. The two teams that have struggled sometimes in tournaments are Marietta and Rochester, and it's not a knock on them. It's just we've seen some losses early on. They're the only ones that are going to keep you from maybe sending this tournament to Whitman in the next weekend. You're guaranteed 2 flights there at least. How much was there some wrangling in that second weekend to keep things as minimum as possible?
Yeah, I would say that the NCAA headquarters got involved in that. How's that?
I had a feeling.
But I do think, and again, I'm obviously biased because I'm involved pretty heavily. I do think it's a really balanced bracket, and I think we got good teams kind of spread throughout, and I'm excited to see how it shakes out. Maybe we'll look back and say, boy, that just didn't come out how we wanted, but right now I think we feel pretty good about it.
I'm curious. I don't know if you've thought this far in advance, and you don't have to necessarily have. I'm just more curious. The Rochester-Marietta scenario is because Rochester is closer to easier airports like Syracuse and Rochester. Is it more likely it goes there, or is this going to come down to SOS and it doesn't matter the airport proximity, as it were, or not SOS? I should say criteria. I misspoke.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we thought about that yet.
Okay. It feels like Babson losing may have moved them into a different part of the bracket.
They did get flipped. I think we still consider them a very strong team and a 1 seed, so to speak. We don't really seed them, but that kind of thought process. And we try to keep them, away as best we can from others. I think, and this is a long time ago, but 15 or 20 years ago, you'd have Babson and Middlebury playing in the same pod, probably. And so we try to keep them apart for sure.
When you had scenarios like Wash U, Tufts, Scranton, was there another one? At least 3.
Christopher
Newport. Thank you. That had to be moved out because you clearly were going to have men's hosting. Did you simply take that foursome and move them to another location, or was there some trickle-down effects that you had to shake up the bracketing? For the most part, it seems like maybe you just moved the pod.
I would say it was pretty close to moving the pod. We did need to trickle a little bit with the mileage, but it really worked out, I think, pretty well. The getting who we wanted to have and balancing each pod, even though they weren't able to host, and I'm sure they're hoping they can win and host the following weekend.
I know that the two Commonwealth Coast Conference teams, Nichols and Endicott, are sitting in the same pod with a possibility. Granted, they'd have to win their games, Endicott over Salisbury and Nichols over Newman, to face off in the second weekend. I have gathered that wasn't an accident. Like, you guys knew who you were putting there.
Yeah, and one of the things that we look at, obviously, is we're trying to keep teams away, especially in the first game and hopefully in the first pod, of teams that have played each other during the year. It doesn't always work that way, but I would say 95% of the time that works. That we're trying to keep teams away from who they've played in the regular season. Then we also look at who did they play last year in the first game or the first pod, and even the year before that. So I've had brackets here on my desk for a long time from 2015, and 2016, and those are probably more in that first than thinking more beyond that. Again, I can speak from experience and say it's almost disappointing at times in my time here where we go play at Hope or we play in the same pod as Hope. That's happened 2 or 3 times in my time here, and I think by being able to stretch the mileage to 500, we've made it kind of a more unique experience, a more balanced experience, and more diverse. Just for us going to Marietta this week and Guilford and Thomas More, that's really fun. We just don't see those teams, so gives it a big feel, I think.
To that degree, though, Endicott and Nichols sitting in there in that same pod. You bring up the Hope v. Calvin and sitting in the same pod. Is there a way we could have flipped them with an Eastern Connecticut, or we could have flipped them with somebody else to take them away from each other? That's what I mean. I feel like you guys knew that, but kept it.
Yeah, we kept it in interest of trying to balance that pod from what we felt were balanced from a quality of team standpoint.
You're saying Eastern Connecticut or somebody moving in would have disrupted that or made another pod a little bit unbalanced?
Yes.
Okay. It does feel like a diversified bracket. I mean, the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Atlantic are very much, and East are very much intermixed this year, which is a little bit different. Sometimes it's a little Northeast or a little bit Atlantic heavy. It feels certainly diverse, and obviously we've got flights potentially in the upper Northwest with the Great Lakes and East mixed in. Heck, I mean, when Whitman's in a pod that's got two Northeast teams and 2 East teams, along with Mid-Atlantic teams and South teams, we're definitely looking at diversity. Is it fair to say the NCAA's also maybe loosened up the restrictions slightly? I don't want to try and encourage anybody to think that they're going to also start blowing the budget again, but it feels like they've at least loosened things up a little bit to let you be a little more creative.
Well, I think the flights is a big thing, and that's just hard. I honestly, I feel bad for Whitman and Whitworth. I mean, how many times has this happened, and the same in Texas, but Whitworth and Whitman have seemed to dominate out there for a long time, and there's just no way of preventing that first pod, I think. But we did get 2 other teams, which was really nice, right? I think we tried to get 2 other teams that they maybe haven't seen, that certainly aren't in their conference, and something like that to try to help in that regard.
It's an interesting dynamic. We're going to get. I mean, we could have all kinds of different ideas as a championship weekend in Salem. We could all be coming out of the same region, or most of them coming out of the same region. They could be different regions. It's certainly diverse. But I am curious how much the 5 NESCAC schools, or as many New England schools as you have a lot of New England schools, how much did that kind of challenge you guys with bracketing?
Yeah, it was a challenge. It was a challenge for sure. But again, I think, and this started a couple years ago, we started heading in the direction of making it more diverse. And there was a time when you had the, Great Lakes region, and whoever won the Great Lakes, they went to the Final Four or whatever it might be, and now I think it's good to separate. Again, you have a Middlebury and Babson, kind of thing. Why would you want them to play in the second round, or that kind of thing? They've earned the right to make their way at least a ways if they could.
Well, I'm not sure if I got anything else left. I think my tank has run dry, but I'm going to quickly check our usual question areas to see if anybody has sent in a question in to us that we have maybe missed. Any thoughts as I do that to the work you guys did that we haven't touched on?
No, I don't. Nothing that I haven't said before. I think it's a very, very difficult job. And we're doing this with others. The Michigan State, Mark Hollis, the athletic director, here is the chair of the Division I, and I think what it is they do and the resources they have and the time they have is a significant difference from what we have, and so the people on the committee sacrifice a great deal of their time and probably putting their workload off on other people to do what I think has been a really good job. And I just tip my hat to all 4 years, the committee members, and it's a part of this. What makes Division III special is you have people like that who are doing it not only in basketball but every sport and every conference tournament, and makes it a neat opportunity for participants for sure.
Well, I think that's about it. I don't see any other questions, so I think I'll let you go. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. The Oshkosh thing is just interesting. I'm curious how it'll turn out. So I appreciate you indulging me as I try to think it through myself. And good luck the rest of the tournament, and especially yourself. Obviously playing against Marietta at their place, which will be fun for everybody to watch as well. I'll close with if there's any final thoughts before we let you go.
We're excited. We have a soccer coach who's now maybe 4th year, and they've done very well. And the first time you went in, one of my basic tenets is any problem in the NCAA tournament is a good problem because you could not be having it. So for us, we see a great challenge in going to Marietta. It'll be an outstanding environment. But, wow, what a fun opportunity to go and play.
Well, enjoy it. Marietta's a cool little southern Ohio town, as you know, and I'm sure you'll have fun. In the meantime, I'm sure I'll talk to you plenty between now and when we see each other in Salem. Otherwise, I will see you there.
Great. Thanks very much, Dave.
Thank you, Kevin. Take care. Kevin Vande Streek joining us on the City of Salem Hoopsville hotline. Appreciate the City of Salem taking the time to sponsor this, the hotline, as they always have. City of Salem, sponsor of host of the Division III Championship Weekend, along with the Old Dominion Athletic Conference. 21st season straight that we will be down there for, at least up to the semifinals. 20th time we'll play the championship game in Salem. Remember, the odd year in Atlanta was the only time we didn't do that. We hope you'll take the time to maybe come into those games. It is certainly worth watching. We'll be there in force ourselves, and looking forward to some big announcements there as well. I think we might have some more questions that I got that are related that I'll try and answer as well. No, not there. Let me double check the email. And I don't. I think we're good. I think we ran out of questions, which is good. But I've also run out of energy, and I want to get off the air before Hoopsville normally comes on the air. This Oshkosh thing is going to take me more time to think over, so I don't want to say much more about it. But I think it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting decision. I think it, in some ways, flies in the face of what we're saying, but I think the information there was critical, that they really look at who you win, and not they ignore losses, but they were not weighed as much. And I'm wondering if that's gone too far in that degree, and not on purpose. I think it's certainly by accident. I think sometimes you get into a thing like, hey, check this out, that you just start forgetting about the other thing, and then you got to come back and remember the other thing. Not sure how that's going to play out. I mean, I was surprised Oshkosh was ranked where they were. They're ahead of Illinois Wesleyan, who certainly had very good criteria. They're ahead of Eau Claire, who had great criteria. Granted, Eau Claire was 0-2 versus Oshkosh, which makes this even muddier a conversation. So I'm not sure what the right answer is. It sounds like the entire committee was on board. I look forward to talking to other committee members and seeing what they think about it. We'll see. Hey, Oshkosh could end up going on a run in this tournament and proving that the committee was on the right way. If they lose, it's going to be fodder, and we'll have to figure out what is the right way to do things. I'm at a point that, I don't know what the right answer is. And I will admit, I think this is an anomaly to some degree. I don't think any 17 and 10 team with a really gaudy SOS enters this situation. The SOS we're talking about out of Oshkosh was ridiculous, if I remember correctly. 602. Considering their losses, it's a 602. I think the highest SOS might have belonged to Middlebury. Does that sound right to anybody out there? I'm quickly scanning numbers, and it's hard to see all those numbers. Yeah, Middlebury had a 613, but they at least were 24-3. So, Oshkosh had a gaudy number, probably the second highest SOS in the country. The question is, quality wins aside, are too many losses just flat out too many losses? And I think that's what we now need to evaluate. And trust me, here's what I know about these committees, especially on the men's side. They will reevaluate this. They'll look at it throughout the tournament. They'll see what's going on. They'll meet again in either May or June and discuss this all over again and reevaluate it from a completely different point of view, having stepped away from it, and say, maybe we made a mistake or we didn't make a mistake. And what I do know is they'll talk with coaches in the NABC. There's a great relationship with the NABC and the National Committee, and they will discuss this. And if the NABC feels, maybe we went too far, the committee will listen. If the stats guys from the NCAA comes back and say, I think you may have overthought this one too, they'll listen. Whether they make changes, I don't know. If any of those entities come back and say, you know what, you made a good decision, this might be a new trend to watch out for. But again, not every 17 and 10 team was going to make the tournament. We're talking about an SOS that was significantly higher than a lot of people, and they're looking at quality wins. They're not, and that's that results versus regionally ranked opponents. When you talk results, you're talking about being able to dive into the numbers and understand what those results were. And if they felt those quality wins were enough to leapfrog them in, that's what they felt. And that's the decision they made. And trust me, we can make arguments up the wazoo of whether Illinois Wesleyan should have had a chance first, or whether Eau Claire, who moved from 4th to 8th in the regional rankings, deserve an opportunity. Trust me, I'm in that conversation with everybody. But at least they're on here talking about it. In the past, they may not have even come on here and talked about it. Let's see what happens. We'll see what goes on the rest of the way. Fascinating conversation, and I look forward to getting more information and seeing how it all plays out. Remember, on the men's side, at least, I believe the games are 5:30 and 7:30 on Friday local time, with a 7 o'clock game on Saturday. Women don't tend to have that time locked down as much, so we'll see where it plays out. Don't forget, look for the announcement coming up here soon as we promote it. We will be doing our own whip-around show type thing. We haven't come up with a really snazzy title yet, but we will be covering all 64 games on Friday and the 32 games on Saturday, nonstop, right here from the Hoopsville studios. Ryan Scott and Gordon Mann will be joining me in studio to do that. We may even have some other assistants, and we'll get calls from around the country, and along with reports from around the country on what's going on in the tournament. That's coming up. Don't forget that we'll have the D3 Bracket Challenge as well. Our friends at D3 Photography help run that. That will be on our website, so you can do that at some point in the near future before games start. We don't have to worry about Thursday games anymore, so everybody's going to have their picks in sometime, probably Friday before games start for sure. And it'll be fun. Listen, no matter what, this is going to be a fun tournament. I think the men's is wide open. I don't think there's any clear, easy runs for anybody. And on the women's side, despite a few who may have some easier roads set up like Amherst, I think the women's is going to be surprising as well. I think we're going to get some awesome games, especially in the second weekend, but even the first weekend. This is going to be a really exciting tournament. I look forward to it and seeing where it may go along the way. I want to thank everybody for reaching out. We're going to wrap up this show as we speak. Andrew, I don't understand your question. Why Holland, Michigan? I don't get it. I may have said something. I don't know. Did I say Holland, Michigan? If I was referring to the women's championship weekend, it's Grand Rapids. There's a very good chance I accidentally said Holland. I've done that a few times since it's been in Holland before as well. I think that's it. Just double checking we don't have any other questions that I'm totally missing. I don't see any, so that's it. We'll be back on the air Thursday, believe it or not, with another Hoopsville. Yeah, we're that crazy. We'll be back on the air Thursday with a Hoopsville, and probably Sunday as well, along with the whip around shows on Friday and Saturday. Stay at d3hoops.com and d3hoopsville.com, of course, on Facebook at facebook.com/Hoopsville, of course, on Twitter at d3hoopsville and hashtag Hoopsville. Keep you abreast of what we are doing the rest of the time. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed this one. Fascinating brackets. It'll be a fun tournament. And I want to thank Bobbi Morgan and Kevin Vande Streek for coming on, and Gordon Mann for assisting me as well. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope we answered your questions. We'll certainly answer more of your questions in the future. For now, I want to thank D3Hoops.com, of course, the Women's Basketball Coaches Association, the National Association of Basketball Coaches, along with the City of Salem, for sponsoring the show and their contributions to it as well. That's going to do it. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you back here on Thursday night as we talk at that point about what may happen in the tournament. Good night, everybody.